Standing inside the grand audience chamber, Gaikaku offered a polite response, expressing how deeply honored he was to stand in such an august presence. The Supreme Commander of the Knight's Order looked down from her high-backed seat, openly commending his standing and acknowledging his worth. Yet beneath his composed exterior, panic clawed at his thoughts. He realized with dread that events had moved far too quickly, cornering him in a situation he had never sought, trapped right in front of the Supreme Commander herself. Looking upon her radiant, unyielding gaze, he found himself utterly overwhelmed, desperately wondering how everything had managed to spiral so far out of control. In truth, this chain of events had begun elsewhere, driven by the rapid rise of a certain lord who had achieved unmatched prominence. His sudden success was entirely owed to the shadow work of an elite secret unit operating behind the scenes. This secret force was composed entirely of formidable women hailing from various races across the realm, each possessing deadly expertise and specialized skills. At the vanguard of this formidable group stood a single, brilliant genius mage, leading them through every dangerous operation. At his private estate, Count Balak gestured proudly toward his sweeping gardens and grand estate, boasting about the true weight of his aristocratic authority. He questioned whether others truly understood what it meant to hold high birth and command absolute respect. Stepping through the massive ornate doors, the young operative entered the Count's hall, his hooded coat flowing as he silently approached. Beneath the shadow of his hood, he listened quietly as the Count continued to lecture on the prestige of noble blood and the overwhelming authority it naturally commanded over ordinary men. Laughing boisterously at his own importance, the noble grandly announced that he would bestow the supreme honor of a critical mission upon him. Playing along with practiced humility, the hooded agent bowed low, claiming to be deeply humbled by such generosity toward a lowly commoner. He listened in silence as Count Balak revealed the nature of the assignment: to hunt down the rogue elite elf, Avier. According to intelligence provided by the Night Order, the renegade mage had taken command of a local bandit gang operating within the noble's territory. The noble slammed his fist onto the desk, unable to comprehend the absurd turn of events, insisting that such a situation was entirely unthinkable under normal circumstances. Agonizing over the betrayal, the Lord recalled how the Night Order represented centuries of prestige, where earning a place in their ranks was universally revered as the supreme honor across all races. His frustration boiled over as he shouted in anger, utterly baffled as to why anyone would cast aside such glorious standing merely to join a band of mountain bandits. As the noble continued to vent his disbelief, the hooded operative gently interjected, asking his employer to calm himself. A subtle smirk formed beneath his hood as he offered a confident promise to take care of the matter promptly. Clearing his throat, Count Balak slid a heavy, coin-filled pouch across the surface, entrusting the covert task to his quiet operative. Securing the bounty, the shadow warrior acknowledged the contract, well aware of the scandal a defector of that caliber posed to the aristocracy. With his eyes hidden beneath his dark fringe, a calm smile lingered on his face as he accepted his role, a shadow whose task was to erase any truth inconvenient to his patrons. The ornate ceiling of the noble manor stretched silently overhead, leaving behind only the cold reality of a dirty job set into motion. Clutching the heavy sack of gold coins in his grip, a sharp, sinister smirk spreads across his face. Taking down a rogue elite elf sounds like an entertaining contract, and he already ponders the most precise way to dissect his target as he walks down the hall. Nearby, two palace guards whisper anxiously in the corridor, sharing reports of a bandit band laying waste to the countryside under the leadership of an elf. They tremble at the realization that only the absolute pinnacle of warriors ever attain the title of knight. Every single one is a one-person army capable of slaughter, making this the absolute worst-case scenario. As they continue to fret over the certainty of massive casualties for anyone sent against the rogue elf, the hooded mercenary glides past them unnoticed. He listens to their quiet panic with amused contempt, his eye gleaming beneath his dark hood with total confidence that not a single member of his own crew will fall. Behind him, one of the guards glances back into the empty hallway, wondering if he heard a passing shadow, only to brush it off as mere imagination. Sometime later, a solitary covered wagon travels along a winding dirt road deep within a dense forest. On the driver's bench sits the hooded traveler, until a rough-looking bandit riding alongside on horseback suddenly halts the carriage with a harsh shout. He is surrounded in moments as dozens of armed bandits pour out from the surrounding thickets, demanding that he step down from the wagon and run for his life. He simply smirks beneath his shadowy hood, thoroughly satisfied that his bait worked and the mountain bandits have walked directly into his trap. He called out to his secret cargo, flinging open the back doors of the carriage to reveal monstrous, towering figures looming in the shadows. The sight brought the surrounding bandits to a sudden halt, their confidence instantly evaporating into sheer bewilderment. Stepping into the open light, the massive beasts unveiled their terrifying visages, hulking creatures clad in thick fur and wearing horned demon masks that dwarfed the human men. Realizing the sheer magnitude of the threat before them, the bandits scattered in panic, shouting warnings to one another as the creatures began to advance with heavy, earth-shaking footsteps. Without a moment's hesitation, one of the furred behemoths raised a gargantuan wooden club, ready to crush everything in its path. With a single downward sweep, the creature smashed through the bandit ranks, sending men airborne like harmless dust. Bodies hit the dirt as dust swirled across the clearing, leaving the remaining raiders cowering on the ground, completely overwhelmed by the brutal display of raw force. Desperate to survive, the terrified men gathered their thoughts, agreeing that their only salvation lay in bringing their elven leader and his magic into the fray. Clinging to this newfound hope, the bandit leader glared back at the beast, boasting that no monster could compare to the true power of their commander. He shouted with pride, declaring that their leader was no ordinary outlaw, but a former elite knight whose magic stood unmatched in battle. He stepped forward calmly, encased entirely within a glowing geometric crystal barrier that hovered effortlessly around his tall frame. As he marched past the giant masked ogres, their relentless assault ground to a halt, leaving the battered bandits to cheer in relief at their leader's timely appearance. The crystalline shield shimmered brightly around him, radiating a dense, oppressive tide of mana that bathed the surrounding clearing in power. The sheer volume of his magical output sent towering columns of raw energy surging into the sky, forcing even the hulking beastmen to recoil in sheer astonishment. Observing the display from under his dark hood, the young assassin could not help but smile, acknowledging that he was indeed facing an elite knight of true renown. Unfazed by the appraisal, the elf listened as his men reported the unsettling nature of their attackers, noting the strange stench of preservative fluids clinging to the monstrous soldiers. Addressing his target directly, Gaikaku admitted his surprise, explaining that he had expected former comrades from the Knight's Order rather than an independent assassin sent to hunt him. He laid out the strategic reality. His employer was merely currying favor with the aristocracy, meaning that regardless of this battle's outcome, the main force of the Order was already en route, rendering the elven commander hopelessly checkmated. With an amused scoff and an outstretched hand, he mocked the futility of their position, declaring their failure to grasp the situation sheer foolishness. He reminded the rogue elf that the Knight's Order was brimming with legendary warriors equal to or surpassing his own strength, making any solitary stand an exercise in absolute suicide. Unmoved by his sharp declaration of checkmate, the elven elite threw wide his arms and shouted in fierce defiance. He acknowledged that the shadow agent might be executing the Lord's explicit orders, but reminded him that he was the one who had recklessly charged into the fray first. Angered beyond measure, he bellowed that he had absolutely no reason to take such insolence from someone like him. Having arrived at the battleground, Gaikaku offers a calm smirk, asserting that this precise outcome was the reason for his journey. In response, Avier stands imperturbable behind his geometric crystal shield, easily deflecting the sudden shockwave directed at him. A massive explosion erupts right before the young fighter, kicking up dense plumes of dust and debris into the air. Catching his breath as the cloud clears, he admits his genuine surprise at feeling worn down, marveling at the absurd amount of force behind the blow. He calculates that the attack he just endured possessed energy equivalent to 10 regular mages striking simultaneously. Across from him, the white-haired elf smiles serenely from inside his barrier, noting that it was only natural for such an effort to fall short. He casually taunts his adversary for coming up one person short, revealing that his protective shield was infused with the magical power of 11 average human mages. Witnessing the impenetrable barrier surrounding allies erupt in cheers, relieved and fully confident in his overwhelming superiority. He goes on to explain the vast disparity in magic, noting that while even a low-tier elf matches 2 skilled human mages and an average elf surpasses 5, such an assault would easily crush lesser foes. Summoning an array of glowing magical crests around his barrier, he boldly proclaims that his true capabilities far transcend even those high elven standards. He threw open his arms as magic surged around him, declaring that an elite elf of his standing wielded power equal to 40 human mages combined. Enclosed within a towering crystalline barrier, the elf proclaimed his absolute superiority over ordinary human spellcasters. Observing from a distance, the young warrior stood unfazed, having already reconstructed his defensive barrier, earning a begrudging compliment from his elven opponent. With a smirking glance toward the unusual ogre allies, the elf taunted that such a massive assault could surely only be unleashed a single time. Raising several ornate magical sigils around his defensive shield, he questioned whether such limited tactics could ever hope to break his absolute defense. Unleashing a devastating torrent of magical energy from the floating catalyst above, the attack rained down upon the frontline defenders in a blinding explosion. The intense bombardment shattered the protective barrier in a shower of sparks, forcing the monstrous allies to absorb the brunt of the impact. Turning back with concern, the leader checked on his companion's condition, relieved to find them still standing despite the heavy blow. However, the sheer force of the blast had pulverized their heavy outer armor, cracking their protective gear to reveal their true forms beneath. Stripped of their bulky shields and heavy plating, the tall ogre warriors stood exposed yet resolute, weapons still firmly in hand. Reassuring his ogre companions after the destruction of their heavy armor, Gaikaku extended a hand and told them that as long as they were safe, losing the armor was a small price to pay, pleading with them not to scare him like that. He stood resolutely ahead of his allies, boldly declaring that they were not about to accept defeat, as a brilliant magic circle suddenly ignited beneath his feet. Watching from afar, Avier looked on in utter bewilderment, questioning what kind of trick this could be and asserting that his opponent couldn't possibly unleash another spell. A smirking response cut him off, correcting his miscalculation just as a sudden surge of violent crackling magic erupted, taking the elf completely by surprise. A blinding flash of light exploded across the battlefield, radiating immense magic power. Farther away, nearby onlookers stared up in terror as a massive wave of energy arched over the landscape, realizing with dread that something catastrophic was approaching. Caught off guard, the elven mage whirled around only to see Gaikaku and the ogres sprinting away, prompting him to shout indignantly at the fleeing group. But his anger instantly turned to horror as he gazed upward, muttering in disbelief at the overwhelming divine judgment descending from above. Trapped inside his protective barrier, he screamed in desperation, demanding to know what had been done, unable to comprehend how anyone could command such an absurd quantity of magic. Meanwhile, Gaikaku casually made a victory gesture as he made his getaway, perfectly pleased with the chaotic spectacle unfolding behind him. He offered only a nonchalant smile, casually claiming to have no idea just how many times he could unleash such devastating power. Stunned by this nonchalant answer, the elven mage's eyes widened in sheer panic as he stammered out his disbelief, terrified by the thought of another relentless assault. Before he could regain his composure, a succession of massive magical bombardments crashed repeatedly into his protective crystal barrier, sending heavy shockwaves echoing through the forest. As the dust began to settle, the young strategist watched with a calm, amused smirk, supremely confident in the outcome. Stepping forward with ease, he walked across the scorched clearing toward the geometric barrier, flanked by his ogre companions. Despite the barrage, the sturdy prism barrier remained intact, sealing the elven prodigy safely inside its crystalline form. Seeing the structure stand, the ogre allies voiced their anxiety, shouting that the elf had endured 4 direct attacks and that his defense was still holding. but their leader calmly interjected. Approaching the translucent shell, he knocked his knuckles lightly against its surface, clarifying that this barrier, which had now withstood 5 massive strikes, was all that remained of the elf's power. Within the enclosure, the elven noble lay motionless on the ground, his vast magical reserves completely depleted from maintaining such absolute defense. Looking down at his unconscious opponent, he praised the elf's astonishing strength, noting that wielding magic greater than 40 people combined was no small feat, admitting he had felt a slight twinge of concern when the barrier absorbed 4 full blasts. He watched calmly as the exhausted elven mage fell to his knees, desperately demanding to know how such massive, continuous magical attacks were even possible without draining his reserves. Shrugging with casual indifference, he responded that he had no real obligation to explain his methods to a defeated enemy. Raising a single finger toward the heavens, he silently directed the noble's attention to the sheer devastation wrought by his magic. Looking up, the elven elite was struck with absolute horror upon realizing that a colossal hole had been punched directly through the dense forest canopy, revealing the clear sky above along the trajectory of the blast. Overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of such power, the proud mage could only stammer in total disbelief. A cold, mocking smirk played across his lips as he echoed the elf's words back to him with chilling disdain. Surrounded by the ominous silhouettes of his allies, he coldly reminded the fallen elite that his prized lineage and talent meant nothing in the face of overwhelming strength. With a final, ruthless decree, the battlefield was engulfed in a blinding flash of magic, consuming everything in its path and turning the land to gold. A few days later, far from the devastated forest, the majestic towers of the royal capital stood tall against the quiet horizon. Deep within the grand castle court, a solemn murmur rippled through the assembled nobles and knights as they gathered around to inspect the undeniable evidence brought before them. She sat stoically as shocked murmurs rippled through the royal court, where officials stared in disbelief at the confirmed defeat of the rogue elf, stunned that anyone possessed the power to eliminate such a formidable opponent without suffering a single casualty. Cutting through the commotion, she declared that further debate was pointless. Even though no formal bounty had been placed on the fugitive, the unknown spellcaster had resolved a crisis that was rightfully the Night Order's burden. Seated proudly upon her high throne, the Supreme Commander gave the order to prepare an appropriate reward for this benefactor, receiving an immediate pledge of obedience from her subordinates. Absorbed in deep contemplation, she pondered the immense strength and skill required for such a victory, sensing that the day when this legendary genius would reveal himself to the world was fast approaching. Far from the capital's grand halls, the young mage pulled his hood lower and let out a subtle grin, deciding that these unfolding developments were certainly intriguing enough to investigate further. Traveling along the dirt path, the companions voiced their doubts about leaving the elf's body behind while complaining about the sweltering heat inside their heavy suits. The leader urged them to endure just a bit longer, pointing out that their campsite was finally coming into view and that Balak's men were set to arrive soon. As they reached the perimeter, the hulking guards stationed at the entrance eagerly called out, welcoming their master back with boisterous enthusiasm. Approaching the squad, he checked in with his men, thanking them for securing the perimeter and verifying that no enemy incursions had occurred in their absence. The guards reassured him that all remained quiet and peaceful. With the camp secured, the heat inside the disguises became unbearable, leading the exhausted women to desperately plead for permission to strip off the suffocating suits. He gave them a simple nod of approval. Free at last from the heavy pelts, the flushed warriors collapsed onto the wooden benches, dripping with sweat as they greedily drank water to cool down. Cast aside on the ground, the discarded suit throbbed with residual heat like an oven, drawing groans from the group as they wondered if a lighter design could ever be crafted. Adjusting his glasses, he solemnly assured them that their feedback was being taken seriously and that equipment upgrades were already underway, though his formal tone only drew amused laughter before someone noticed newcomers approaching. 3 young children came running toward them across the dirt road, their faces beaming with joy as they cheered for their leader's return. Bright young villagers rushed forward with beaming smiles, eagerly announcing that a hot meal was waiting and that the rescued elf maidens had been well cared for in their absence. They recounted how worried they had been when everyone collapsed from exhaustion, explaining that the elven women had endured a particularly rough time. Hearing this, the dark-haired leader warmly commended their efforts, assuring them that their hard work had made the entire mission a success. Directed toward the large medical tent where the weary fighters rested, he nodded in understanding and agreed to go check on their condition immediately. Throwing open the heavy tent flaps with a broad smile, the young commander announced his arrival, joyfully congratulating everyone inside for their incredible bravery in bringing down their formidable opponent. Inside, a sea of exhausted elven maidens lay sprawled across the floor, groaning softly in sheer fatigue after pushing their bodies far beyond their physical limits. As helpful hands circulated among the fallen, offering refreshing water, the blonde elven warrior looked up through her weariness, her dark eyes softening as she called out to her master. He acknowledged her gaze, acknowledging the terrifying strength of their adversary, a former knight who had absorbed every single one of their incoming magical attacks head-on, without so much as flinching. Hearing his evaluation, the elven maidens murmured among themselves in quiet disappointment, realizing that even their combined spell-casting had barely managed to land a decisive blow against such a monster. Looking down at her hands with a heavy heart, she lamented that despite all their efforts, they remained low-ranking nobodies who were ultimately useless on the battlefield. Reaching out with an encouraging gesture, he gently challenged her harsh self-criticism, pointing out that in the end, it was their relentless determination that had successfully worn down the adversary all on their own. He stood before the resting elven maidens, assuring them that the success of the entire operation was made possible by every single one of them. Hearing his sincere praise, Zashi smiled brightly, overwhelmed with relief and joy that her efforts had truly mattered. As a wave of celebration swept through the tent, he looked on with a satisfied smile, glad to see their spirits lifted. Before taking his leave, he reminded them that he would be departing in 2 days and instructed everyone to take their medicine and rest well. Stepping outside with a quiet, knowing chuckle, his attention turned toward the massive siege weapon positioned nearby. The giant device was known as the Demon Tower Composite Magic Cannon, the true secret weapon that had drained the elite elven forces' mana. Powered by a complex magic circle, the cannon functioned by drawing and storing energy directly from 5 elves to fire a single, catastrophic blast. Once fully charged through their painful exertion, the weapon locked onto a distant guiding marker to unleash its power with absolute precision. This destructive sequence was repeated 4 times, delivering direct, pulverizing strikes against the enemy positions. Their magnificent victory was no stroke of luck, but a ruthless tactic that relied on utilizing 20 exhausted elves as human power generators. To the enemy, it appeared as an impossibly long-range bombardment, but in reality, the magic was being projected directly in front of them. Along with the 20 ogre soldiers guarding the perimeter and the 20 goblins handling camp logistics, a massive collective force had been mobilized. Standing alone, he reflected on how that formidable elite warrior was ultimately brought down by an overwhelming group of commoners through sheer numbers. Smirking quietly, he mused that a single human could never overcome such overwhelming odds, a harsh truth he felt he should have shared before his enemy's demise. He knew that 61 individuals working together would always prevail, for victory ultimately belonged to numerical force rather than solitary genius. Later, the wealthy noble handed over a heavy pouch of coin, praising his brilliant success in exterminating the bandits and subduing the rogue knight. Seeing the massive pile of filled reward sacks sitting before him, the young man could hardly believe the immense bounty he had earned. Gathering the heavy bags into his arms, he listened as the aristocrat chuckled at his obvious fondness for wealth, assuring him that his hard work earned every coin. Taking a casual sip from his cup, he admitted to himself that whenever money was involved, his deeply materialistic nature was impossible to conceal. Suddenly, the noble leaned in with a sly expression, probing whether he had any connection to recent rumors regarding the illicit sale of suspicious potions. He stood composed under the aristocrat's sharp gaze as the Viscount directly questioned whether he was the secret mastermind behind the illicit potion trade. Shaking his hands dismissively, he quickly played off the accusation as a mere joke, claiming he was already far too overwhelmed with his current workload to entertain such schemes. Taking the cue, the satisfied nobleman bade him farewell while he quietly made his exit to avoid further suspicion. As he walked down the grand corridor, the Viscount watched him depart, marveling silently that someone so capable would be satisfied with such a modest payout. The moment the door closed, the lord burst into boisterous laughter, mocking the young swordsman's lack of accounting skills and gloating that a job of this magnitude deserved 10 times what was paid. Wearing a smug smirk, the nobleman reasoned to himself that this was simply the way of the world, where aristocrats acting as risk-free intermediaries deserve all the profit. Outside the estate, he reunited with Najii, who was waiting eagerly beneath the stone archways to ask if the negotiations had gone smoothly. Although he casually assured her that the deal was a complete success, her scowl deepened as she hesitantly suggested finding a different client next time. Unable to contain her anger any longer, she fumed with fiery annoyance, declaring how much she despised working for such a pompous, arrogant noble. As they strolled together down the path, he lightly chided her outburst, suggesting she show a bit more empathy, though she remained thoroughly unconvinced. She continued her passionate rant, insisting that they had done all the dangerous work only for the greedy nobleman to take the credit and pocket almost all the reward. She continued her sharp rationale, pointing out that if obscure nobodies like them dragged a dead elf's corpse straight to the knight's order, trouble would immediately follow. Without a public bounty on the target's head, no authority would simply accept that common wanderers had slain rogue knights without raising lethal suspicion. Even with the noble taking a massive cut off the top, the arrangement remained far more lucrative than odd jobs or illicit labor, leaving them dependent on aristocrats for legitimacy. Yet he strolled casually ahead, entirely unfazed by the financial loss so long as he enjoyed his freedom, prompting her to yell after his indifferent back. As they continued down the dirt path, a stroke of inspiration suddenly struck the elf as she watched a passing researcher in the distance. Clasping her hands together in excitement, she enthusiastically declared that he should seek employment at a research laboratory instead. Hearing her sudden and absurd proposal, he turned back with a completely bewildered look upon his face. Unbothered by his confusion, she began painting a grand daydream where admiring crowds would marvel at his vast knowledge and beg to become his assistants. In her elaborate fantasy, he would coolly turn down all prospective applicants, declaring that he already had a perfectly capable assistant right beside him. Overwhelmed by her own flattering imagination, she swooned in delight while he simply kept walking, ignoring her dramatic romanticization. She whined in protest, clinging desperately to her ideal scenario. But her companion immediately shattered her daydream by declaring he had zero intention of taking a regular job. He bluntly pointed out that the reality of his work went far beyond simple employment, as his current activities were entirely against the law. Expanding on his reasoning, he explained that the composite weapon they had recently deployed was highly illegal, countering her confusion regarding magic efficiency with cold, practical logic. He grimly detailed how this world's established methods relied on human sacrifice, binding living people and elves to turn them into disposable mana batteries and tools. From a purely economic standpoint, he argued that exploiting prisoners or enemy soldiers was vastly cheaper for the authorities than relying on expensive, top-grade mana recovery potions. Because the specialized technology he utilized had been anciently sealed and strictly banned, any official institution would instantly reject or confiscate his creations. Joining an official organization would permanently strip him of the freedom to build or operate his forbidden arsenal, forcing him to remain an independent rogue. Concluding his lecture, he asserted that their current arrangements were ideal, leaving the young elf gaping in speechless disbelief. As they walked, he realized they had reached their intended destination, while she voiced her immediate unease at the gloomy surroundings. They stood directly before the imposing gates of the slave market, a grim establishment that horrified the elf to her core. He tilted his head beneath the deep shadows of his hood, a subtle, knowing smirk spreading across his lips as he prepared to proceed. Stepping into the gloomy heart of the market, he began inspecting the rows of iron cages filled with bound captives, scanning through the quiet elven women and watchful beastkin to see if any possessed skills worthy of his plans. Inside the grand, multi-tiered hall of the slave market, an auctioneer's shout rang out across the packed theater, setting the staggering starting price at 20 million. Observing the bustling crowd from the floor, she remarked on how exceptionally lively and intense the atmosphere in the auction hall was. Higher and higher the bids climbed from the balcony seats, rapidly escalating from 25 million up to 40 million as wealthy buyers competed fiercely. Stepping away into a quiet side street, her hooded master explained that the main hall dealt exclusively in elite, high-grade slaves, whereas this tranquil alley was where bottom-tier offerings were sold, a location she quietly admitted to having been purchased from herself. Approaching a shabby storefront, the young man was greeted with overly dramatic enthusiasm by a scraggly merchant who gushed about him being his only faithful returning customer. He pointed out plainly that there were literally no other shoppers anywhere in sight. Desperate, the merchant begged him to buy something so his business wouldn't collapse, while the young man calmly calculated that if the shop went under, finding another supplier would be a hassle he'd rather avoid. He watched as the desperate merchant bowed low and pleaded, realizing he had little choice but to make a purchase from this stall. Seeing Zashi's well-kept appearance, the merchant marveled at how remarkably well-off she seemed, while she proudly boasted about finding such a good master. Asking the trader for his recommendation, he prompted the flustered merchant to quickly direct them toward a specific cell, claiming to have a very special offering available today. Inside the cell sat a group of dark elf women, whom the shopkeeper eagerly offered up as an affordable option tailored perfectly to his customers' preferences. Considering the offer, he noted that dark elves possessed noticeably less magical energy than their high elf counterparts. However, their naturally sharp senses and resilient physiques made them exceptional hunters capable of thriving in the harshest environments. Finding their practical traits useful, he casually agreed to purchase the entire group on the spot, handing over 200,000 coins to the stunned merchant. With the transaction complete, the shopkeeper pointed toward the shadowy back of the cage, calling his attention to another group kept hidden in the darkness. Looking closer into the gloom, he spotted several beastkin females huddled together, their sharp eyes gleaming behind the bars. Recognizing their physical blend of human and animal features, he listened as the merchant cautioned him that their fiercely rebellious nature made them difficult to tame. He listened as the merchant explained that while beastkin lack magical power, their explosive physical speed is exceptional. The merchant qualified his assessment, noting that such traits were only useful if the captives were obedient, though ogres were often better suited for raw labor despite their limited stamina. He went on to detail how survivors of defeated tribes were sold to human traders, ultimately ending up in these cages because they refused to obey orders. Watching the captive beastkin, Zashi quietly questioned whether future buyers would truly believe they were offering aid or simply procuring commodities. Pausing before the iron bars, he carefully observed the demeanor of the captives within. Rather than showing broken spirits, the three cat-eared warriors glared back with fierce, unyielding resolve. A faint smile touched his lips, clearly impressed by the intense fire remaining in their eyes. When the seller asked if he was truly certain about taking such rebellious captives, he confirmed his choice, stating he needed individuals with genuine spirit. Turning back toward the cage, he offered a polite greeting, introducing himself as the Mage Gaikaku Hikom. With the transaction concluded, he led his newly acquired companions, both the Dark Elves and the Beastkin warriors, out into the light. He led his newly acquired followers toward their destination, though the Dark Elves and Beastkin braced themselves for the worst, fully expecting another bleak sentence of forced labor under a cruel master. Upon reaching the secluded settlement, the young master announced that they had finally arrived at their base, leaving the newcomers to resignedly accept their grim expectations as bottom-tier outcasts. Instead of a grim work camp, the path opened up into a picturesque, sunlit village filled with charming timber houses, blooming gardens, and bustling, cheerful residents. Dumbfounded by the serene view before them, the newly arrived warriors stood frozen in silence, unable to comprehend the peaceful paradise that defied all their fears. The tranquil silence was broken as the villagers eagerly shouted warm greetings to welcome their leader back, proving beyond a doubt that this sanctuary was far from the harsh prison they had imagined. Brightly smiling village women and seasoned companions rushed forward to greet the squad, expressing their excitement to work alongside the new arrivals. Overwhelmed by the sight of healthy, well-dressed residents full of vitality, the newcomers began to let their guards down, asking their young master if it was truly acceptable for them to hope for a peaceful life. Turning directly to their savior, the fierce catgirl warrior sought answers, questioning why such a diverse assembly of different races was gathered together in what appeared to be a simple farm. She pointed out that while beastkin, ogres, and goblins were well suited for heavy labor, seeing delicate elves and dark elves working in such an environment felt entirely unnatural. With a subtle smile playing across his lips, he gently reminded her of his true identity as a powerful mage who defies conventional norms. He explained that his true role was to command a secret unit serving directly under the Lord, in essence, a private army composed of diverse races. Expanding on their roles, he noted that while ogres typically handled heavy physical labor during peacetime, they were deployed as formidable heavy infantry when war broke out. He added that goblins handled miscellaneous chores in peacetime but operated artillery during battles, while the elves, normally skilled in preparing medicine, were also repurposed for artillery support during conflicts. Hearing this breakdown, the catgirl warrior listened in awe, repeating the roles in wonder as she realized the strategic depth of their organization. Flattered by the impressive descriptions of their specialized units, the female recruits began to preen and giggle with pride. Imagining themselves as high-ranking operatives, they excitedly asked if that meant they were all elite members of an exclusive secret force. Crushing their inflated egos instantly, he coldly reminded them of reality, stating plainly that they were merely bottom-tier, leftover slaves with no special status. As the demoralized recruits wailed in protest at his brutal honesty, he turned his back on them without a hint of remorse. Dismissing their complaints, he walked ahead and remarked that putting on airs only leads to trouble once the truth is exposed, leaving the recruits moping behind him. Despite his harsh words, the catgirl warrior and her companions stared after him in disbelief, astonished that they were truly being given a second chance as part of a covert military unit. She realized that while society viewed bottom-tier slaves as mere disposable pawns incapable of becoming real soldiers, this place operated under entirely different rules. Gaikaku listened quietly as the recruits digested the harsh truth about their standing, offering to reveal the secret to transforming them into true combatants. The young commander led the group down a wide corridor, leaving their doubts behind as they followed his confident stride. Upon opening the massive doors at the end of the hall, he unveiled a towering chamber housing immense, glowing containment pods, taking the catgirl completely by surprise. Looking around in awe, the recruits gasped as they beheld dozens of giant suit-like structures lined up along the facility walls, realizing the true scale of his operation. Gaikaku proudly presented his personal invention, declaring it to be a cultivated flesh-and-bone golem reinforced armor designed specifically to elevate their combat performance. Examining the colossal constructs, the beastkin warrior noted that while average bottom-tier individuals possessed only twice the physical strength of a human, these custom-crafted weapons could turn anyone into a force to be reckoned with. He elaborated on the power gap, explaining how an average ogre was 5 times stronger than a human and an elite over 40 times, making magical gear essential for weaker races to bridge the divide. By equipping magical tools and undergoing rigorous training, he assured them that even the lowliest recruits had achieved great power and distinguished themselves on the front lines. Turning back to face them, he made it clear that they were never meant to be disposable pawns thrown into slaughter, but warriors meant to conquer enemies and return alive. With a confident smile, Gaikaku concluded that the true driving force behind his unit was the pride and dignity restored to every soldier who fought beside him. His words struck a deep chord within the recruits, their eyes wide with quiet realization. Reflecting on his explanation, they acknowledged why hearing the brutal reality had stung so deeply. Reminded of past defeats where weakness brought only mockery, they saw this facility as their chance to gain real experience and strength. Overcome with resolve, each of the bound fighters eagerly demanded to receive the specialized golem suit. Reclaiming their warrior pride, their faces hardened with newfound passion and unbreakable determination. Observing their fierce resolve, he smirked thoughtfully, realizing his investment in them was paying off better than expected. Meanwhile, across the territory at the regional estate, an urgent shout echoed through the stone courtyard. A scout burst into the Count's grand office to deliver a pressing report from the front lines. The messenger breathlessly alerted him that 10 heavily armed ogres had invaded and seized a nearby farming village. Smirking shrewdly, the Count immediately ordered Gaikaku's newly established Mage battalion to mobilize and eliminate the threat. Deep within a ruined, desolate settlement, a band of monstrous intruders lounged inside a crude wooden shelter, loudly boasting about how easily humans yielded to their terrifying presence. They roared with boisterous laughter, celebrating their good fortune in finding human lands so weak and ripe for plundering. One of the horned ogres smirked broadly, explaining that humans would hand over whatever was demanded the moment they were threatened. Their gloating was abruptly cut short when a sudden, loud sound echoed from outside the wooden building. Perplexed by the unexpected disruption, they turned toward the open window frame to investigate what was happening outside. Just beyond the threshold, small and inexperienced hands clutched simple wooden bucklers and short blades, trembling uncontrollably from nervous apprehension. Looking upon the gathering, the ogres burst into mocking laughter at the ridiculous sight, questioning whether this was merely a pathetic game of pretend soldiers being played with young women. Despite their evident fear and frail equipment, the Beastkin warrior and her fellow companions held their shields firmly, resolved to face the giants regardless of their condescending taunts. She stood among the recruits as the brute ogres burst into mocking laughter, marveling at the audacity of a lone man and his novice squad attempting to challenge them. Despite their overwhelming size and taunts, he merely offered a calm, knowing smirk from beneath his dark hood, entirely unbothered by their threats. Before this confrontation, he had reached an agreement with the Count, securing full authorization to handle the menace threatening the territory once again. The threat was clear. A band of 10 ogres was moving from village to village, plundering food and alcohol before burning what remained. Rather than taking the front lines alone, he discussed strategy with his core companions, deciding that this attack presented the perfect opportunity to give the inexperienced recruits a taste of true combat. Driven by this plan, he suddenly turned to the nervous young recruits and loudly declared that every single one of them would be stepping onto the front lines with him. Across the dusty village road, the heavy footfalls of the ogres ground to a halt as they spotted the approaching squad, chuckling among themselves over the unexpected entertainment. Flaunting their crude weaponry, the hulking beasts mocked the incoming group, noting with glee that they were all young women and calling dibs on specific targets for some post-meal exercise. In response to the vile taunts, the elf and the feline warrior held their ground with firm, unwavering gazes, remaining focused on the task ahead. Stepping out ahead of his unit right before the towering monsters, he raised his voice to command total concentration from every recruit behind him. Flanked by the shield-bearing squad, he stood firm with his hand poised near his cloak, telling them to keep their eyes wide open because they were about to witness how their true battle began. His tactical arrangement immediately roared to life as feet stepped onto the glowing circles of the magic array. Near the river outside the village, recruits assembled around a massive magical artillery piece positioned at the center of the camp. As a signal flared above, one of the girls called out that the cue had arrived, prompting their leader to urge everyone to channel every drop of their magical power into the weapon. Addressing the gathered crowd upon the platform, she raised her voice to rally their spirits as bright light surged beneath their feet. Driven by their collective strength, the energy rushed through the internal conduits of the giant cannon, illuminating the complex runes carved inside the barrel. Within seconds, the muzzle reached full saturation, crackling with intense magical density, ready to be unleashed. With a deafening roar, the artillery launched a blinding beam high into the heavens, allowing the drained recruits to step down and rest while others took over the next phase. Overseeing the operation from the grounds, he raised his hand toward the sky, signaling for the second stage of the spell strike to rain down upon their enemies. Miles away, the sharp crack of thunder startled the ogre leader, forcing him to look up into the clear sky with sudden apprehension. Before the beasts could react, the high-altitude beam split into a barrage of explosive scatter shots, pounding the ogre ranks in a chaotic display of magic and fire. Sweat beaded on the horned warrior's forehead as panic set in, his teeth gritting in bitter fury at the realization that a concealed spellcaster was striking them from afar. Standing motionless amidst the swirling dust, the hooded strategist maintained a cold, unflinching composure in front of the enemy lines. Infuriated by his silence, the hostile warrior raised a fist and shouted threats of vengeance, swearing that the insult would not go unpunished. He responded with a calm, understated retort, dismissing their threats with absolute coolness and provoking the hostile mob into a frenzy of rage. Seizing what they believed to be an opening, the assailants surged forward with weapons raised, completely unaware of the looming shadow rising behind them. Their charge ground to a halt as a towering, monstrous titan materialized right behind them, casting a deadly shadow over their ranks. Terror seized the warrior's face as he looked up directly into the monstrous jaws of the beast that was about to crush them. In a single, devastating blow, the massive shockwave slammed into the assailants, scattering their forces and wiping out the hostile front line in a cloud of debris. With the dust settling over the fallen enemy party, the squad celebrated their flawless execution, recounting how their leader had lured the enemy into a false sense of security before their magic spellcasters and heavy assault shattered the defensive line. Turning to his companions, he inquired about their thoughts on the battle's result, prompting a triumphant laugh from the tall female elf as she expressed immense satisfaction at their resounding victory. She stood among the group, praising their overwhelming success, marveling at how smoothly the battle had gone despite facing elf combatants on the field. Hearing their excitement, the young leader scoffed quietly, pointing out that victory was guaranteed from the very beginning and that his newly designed weapons had not even been necessary. A female commander agreed, breaking down the cold math of the engagement. A 40-strong enemy force composed of 20 frontline ogres and 20 supportive elven spellcasters had heavily outnumbered their 10 defenders. He further explained that without proper tactics, half of their team would have surely perished against such numbers, making strategic discipline the true decisive factor. Reflecting on the fallen enemy troops, he acknowledged that even if the Count had deployed proper soldiers instead of these recruits, the tactical outcome would have remained unchanged. Surrounding him, his companions listened in awe as he privately savored the deep satisfaction of securing a flawless victory without a single casualty. Striking an exuberant pose, he proudly proclaimed that practical combat experience was unmatched and that putting his theories to the test was both useful and thrilling. The Beastkin and Elven warriors cheered with excitement as he promised that custom weapons tailored specifically for each of them would soon be completed for their next engagement. Turning his gaze toward the newly captured Elven maidens standing hesitantly nearby, he inquired about their intentions, causing them to flush with nervous apprehension. Laughing lightheartedly at their timid response, he warmly reassured them that there was no rush and that the rest of his crew had been just as hesitant when they first joined. While he rested within the encampment under the glowing full moon, one of the newly rescued dark elves sat quietly in contemplation, well aware of her race's reputation as sharp-eared hunters of the night. Gazing across the peaceful campsite, she marveled at how a group of outcast beastfolk could display such astonishing tactical power and enthusiasm. Being around someone so extraordinary felt strange to her, leading her to wonder if her cautious, calculating nature could truly adjust to this new environment. Meanwhile, near one of the central tents, another elven maiden delivered a vial of medicine, unable to contain her restlessness despite the late hour. Overflowing with excitement, the horned elf maiden burst into the commander's quarters, completely consumed by the lingering surge of victory. Dropping eagerly before him, she pleaded for a way to soothe her heightened instincts, knowing full well the troublesome nature of her species. Outside, the dark elf watched in sheer disbelief as she realized her companion had already taken bold initiative without hesitation. To make matters even more chaotic, an eager crowd of elven women suddenly gathered outside the tent, impatiently arguing over who would get the threatening. Observing the unbelievable spectacle from outside, His companion worried with growing disbelief that such endless exertion would drain his vitality to the point of collapse. By the following morning, however, he stepped outside remarkably unharmed, prompting his astonished companion to inquire if his body was truly all right after such an ordeal. Their conversation turned to the secret behind his extraordinary endurance, specialized medicines of this realm capable of dramatically altering physical limits, though classified as illegal contraband. He strictly cautioned her to keep the existence of these potent substances a secret from the local lord, a request she nervously accepted. Adjusting his cloak as he continued forward, he was warmly greeted by Najii and her fellow elven companions, who respectfully addressed him as their mentor. They immediately brought up his legendary stamina from the previous night's encounters, marveling at how he managed the overwhelming crowd of ogre maidens. Flanked by her friends, Najii enthusiastically requested that they also receive a suitable reward later on for their dedicated service during the recent conflict. As he casually agreed to their wishes, his companion observed him from behind, coming to the quiet realization that he was far more complex than just a simple eccentric. He had earned the complete admiration of the maidens around him, who marveled at his noble bearing and declared that he seemed far more fitting to be a lord than any actual nobleman. Several weeks passed, and word of the successful ogre extermination reached Count Balak's territory, accompanied by a formal letter of gratitude sent directly from the grateful villagers. Inside his lavish manor, the Count basked in the praise of his attendants, smugly accepting their compliments for handling the crisis swiftly and without a single casualty, as merely doing what was expected of his status. Unaware of how transparent his greed was, he laughed heartily to himself, reveling in the idea that a noble's true role was to let low-born commoners do the dangerous work while wealth and prestige rolled straight into his hands. Meanwhile, far away in the royal capital, an official report regarding Count Balak's suspicious activities was delivered directly to the high-ranking female commander. The investigator detailed the official claims stating that Balak had personally led his forces into battle to vanquish the powerful demon Avier. Interrupting the briefing, she flatly rejected the official claim, stating with utter certainty that the account of his leadership in battle was completely false. Her subordinate confirmed that while Balak had indeed delivered Avier's corpse, uncovering his lie required little effort because he had made almost no attempt to conceal his deception. She thoughtfully observed that for such a fool to claim credit for such a feat, he must be supported by exceptionally capable subordinates who possessed the true strength expected of a real lord. When her aide questioned whether Count Balak should be formally punished for falsifying royal reports out of sheer vanity, she firmly declined, recognizing that a deeper, more carefully considered response was required. She rested her chin on her laced fingers, considering her options carefully. Recognizing that the root of the issue reflected poorly on her own organization's oversight, she decided against immediate punishment, opting instead to initiate formal contact. Far from the capital, Count Balak contentedly savored his inflated reputation, entirely oblivious to the scrutiny gathering around him as whispers began to spread. Though skeptical that a man of his standing could truly wield such immense influence, she resolved to grant him a single opportunity to explain himself. The target this time was a rogue squad of ex-soldiers who had deserted and turned into ruthless bandits, raiding towns across the region. Unlike their past adversaries, their current hideout was completely unknown, making direct action impossible without intelligence. Considering their tactical options, the female commander evaluated heavy military responses, though she conceded that slow-moving artillery or heavy setups would be utterly ineffective against such mobile and elusive targets. Recognizing the need for speed and agility, he decided to alter their approach, announcing that this mission would be entrusted to the quick-footed Beastkin squad. Upon hearing his words, her cat ears twitched in excitement, a triumphant smile breaking across her face at the prospect of action. Overflowing with enthusiasm, she shouted eagerly to her chief, seeking confirmation that they would finally be allowed into battle. Pumping her fists, she beamed as he assured her that he was counting on them for the attack, while taking charge of scouting himself. Turning his attention toward the dark elf operatives standing nearby, he explained that their stealth and expertise would be essential for discovering the enemy's whereabouts. As one of the dark elves questioned whether they should engage in combat, he quickly clarified their mission, instructing them to focus entirely on locating the bandits without getting drawn into a fight. He listened calmly as Fa Pose, the Dark Elf Scout, expressed her deep reservations about engaging trained human soldiers, recalling the strict warnings from her homeland to always exercise extreme caution when facing human forces. Unfazed by her concerns, he countered that the situation was entirely different, reasoning that if these soldiers had fallen low enough to resort to banditry, they had already lost their discipline and posed far less of a threat. Reassuring her that seeing his plan in motion would dispel her doubts, he reminded her that their immediate priority was reconnaissance, urging the scouts to locate the enemy camp so the operation could finally begin. Armed with marked maps, the Dark Elf Scouts fanned out into the wilderness, moving silently and efficiently to cover the designated search areas. Stealthily approaching a clearing, one of the operatives spotted a group of rowdy men drinking and carousing around a bonfire, oblivious to the eyes watching them from the shadows. Remaining hidden in the dense foliage, she listened closely as the deserters began airing their grievances in loud, bitter tones. The former regular soldiers vented their frustration, complaining bitterly about how the military command favored demi-human units despite this being a human kingdom. Their resentment flared even higher as they argued that these non-human warriors did nothing during times of peace, ignoring the hard labor and preparation required of ordinary infantry. They insisted that a soldier's true duty involved logistics, supply preparation, and endless grueling labor rather than just combat prowess. Enraged by what they perceived as blatant unfairness, the bandits resolved to embrace their new outlaw life, turning their sight toward raiding a nearby village that lay just down the path. As she watched from cover, the rogue soldiers openly flaunted their cruel intentions, harassing their helpless female captives and boasting about their impending rampage. Gloating arrogantly at the back of the marching column, a heavy-set bandit expressed his sinister desires, fully convinced that no force stood in their way. Before his boastful words could even settle, a massive stone suddenly struck him square in the face, shattering his toothy grin into a spray of blood and pain. Total chaos erupted immediately as surrounding soldiers panicked, shouting out warnings while another comrade crumpled to the earth under the merciless bombardment. Ducking low beneath the barrage, a warrior braced himself against the soil, raising his shield just in time to deflect the heavy projectiles raining down. Desperate cries echoed through the tree-line as the mercenaries scrambled to form a defensive line, holding up shields to withstand the relentless barrage of giant rocks. Amidst the confusion, heavy tactical boots silently touched down upon a high branch, drawing the bewildered gaze of the terrified mercenaries below. Perched comfortably within the canopy, a pair of beastkin scouts dressed in modern camouflage fatigues stared down at the enemy force, shouting out their commanding position. Attempting to rally his panicked troops, a soldier scoffed that the attackers were merely throwing rocks from the foliage and urged everyone to keep their composure. Observing the pair perched above with limited ammunition, the rogue mercenary commander smugly concluded that despite their high ground, the isolated attackers had foolishly trapped themselves. Her unexpected tactical assault left the human soldiers fuming with anger, as their leader gritted his teeth in bitter resentment against the non-human attackers. Spurred by feelings of inferiority, the men grumbled about how humanity was routinely dismissed as an average, unremarkable species compared to the other races of the world. They knew that while elves possessed immense natural talent for high magic, their fragile physical bodies made them uniquely vulnerable in direct combat. By contrast, humans lacked the raw magical potency of elves and the overwhelming physical strength of ogres, remaining trapped somewhere in the middle. Yet, despite their physical shortcomings, the soldier began channeling his own spell, summoning a glowing geometric magic circle above his outstretched palm. With fierce determination, he declared that versatility and adaptability were humanity's true assets on the field of war. Unleashing a brilliant beam of magical energy directly toward her high roost, he sought to prove that adaptable warriors ultimately dominate any engagement. Unfazed by the retaliatory light show, she merely smirked in confidence at their desperate defense. As the magical blast illuminated the dense forest canopy, a terrifying, coordinated war cry echoed through the trees. Dropping down swift and silent from the branches above, the camouflage-clad beastkin squad descended directly upon the startled human lines. She plummeted through the branches alongside her squad, executing a swift aerial maneuver that caught the humans off guard. Descending rapidly from above, the scout squad closed the distance on the group of soldiers gathered below. Caught off guard, the soldiers voiced their growing panic, questioning how many enemies approached and noting the unpredictable nature of their movement. One soldier analyzed the situation in disbelief, marveling that the intruders could bound off thin branches that ought to snap under their weight. He watched as even the smallest twigs bent flexibly without breaking, defying all physical expectations. The men argued among themselves, demanding to know if invisible wires supported the branches or what manner of magical trickery was being employed. Suddenly, a tense quiet settled over the clearing as the attackers vanished completely into the dense canopy, leaving the soldiers searching the towering trees in confusion. While one soldier foolishly wondered if the ambushers had fled, his comrade sharply chastised him, pointing out that their foes were merely preparing to strike from concealment. The utility of modern camouflage patterns proved to be a formidable tactical advantage, breaking up human contours in the forest terrain. While a narrow field of vision makes targets easy to spot, searching a vast, open forest for an unknown number of hidden enemies creates overwhelming psychological dread. Deep within the dense forest, confusion spreads through the human ranks as the enemy seems to vanish into thin air. Frantic orders echo among the trees, commanding soldiers to scour the surrounding woods. Yet tracking targets with such elusive camouflage proves virtually impossible. Just feet away from the clueless patrols, the feline warrior rests quietly against a tree trunk, perfectly blended into the foliage. Even as the searchers urge each other to look closer, her squad remains entirely unseen in plain sight. Seizing the moment of total distraction, she and her squad launched themselves from the high branches down into the midst of the disoriented formation. Terror strikes one of the defenders as he realizes another sudden assault has begun before they can even align their defenses. Heavy rounded projectiles rain down from above, surrounding the trapped platoon completely. Cries of alarm ring out as the men brace themselves, urging one another to guard their vital spots against what they assume to be mere stones. Without enough time to conjure a proper protective spell, a frontline soldier raises his wooden shield, confident that it can easily deflect simple rocks. His confidence shatters instantly upon closer inspection of the objects rolling around them. Sparks dance along burning fuses attached to dark, ceramic spheres. Panic turns into pure horror as he recognizes the deadly design. Ceramic casings filled with gunpowder and lead shot, crafted specifically to explode into lethal shrapnel, a primitive yet devastating hand grenade. A deafening roar rips through the clearing as the charges detonate simultaneously, engulfing the soldiers in violent shockwaves and searing fire while the beastkin shelter behind their tactical gear. When the thick smoke finally begins to clear, the human squad lies incapacitated on the forest floor, allowing the camouflaged warriors to touch down smoothly and advance without further resistance. She stood over the defeated human soldier, who coughed bitterly on the ground, spurning her victory by pointing out that their advanced gear had been provided by humans rather than crafted by their own hands. When she calmly inquired why he harbored such deep-seated hatred for her kind, the wounded man snarled back without hesitation, shouting that he despised them as filthy freaks. Rather than taking offense, the cat-eared warrior merely smiled with quiet confidence, completely unfazed by his hostile outbursts. Joining her comrades as they gathered before their leader in the forest clearing, the squad received high praise for taking down the enemy unit without suffering a single scratch, attributing their flawless success entirely to the special tactical gear he had designed. Demonstrating its unique property, she leaped into the air, hovering with effortless lightness thanks to the buoyant, lightweight pack built directly into her tactical vest. The specialized gear was far more than a simple backpack. It functioned as an integrated full-body harness, complete with front pouches tailored specifically to carry stones and ceramic explosive grenades. Within its hidden rear compartment lay the key to its extraordinary design, a chamber filled with an extremely buoyant, ultralight gas. Encased in durable leather that acted like a balloon, The vest drastically reduced the wearer's effective weight, allowing the squad to glide swiftly through dense forest canopies without getting snagged on branches. Satisfied with the field test, their leader noted that these results proved the lethal utility of high-mobility grenadiers, inspiring him to brainstorm even more daring tactics, while she reflected on how deeply their human foes truly despised them. Nearby, the Dark Elf scout leader observed the fallen enemy soldiers in disbelief, marveling at how swiftly a seasoned human squad had been brought down. She observed as Hikum reflected on the captured human soldiers, who had deserted out of frustration with their poor treatment in hopes of forcing better conditions. He noted that while losing a few men was unfortunate for them, it barely dented the overall might of the main human forces. The true strength of the human army lay in their sheer numbers, organized military bases, and endless capacity to request reinforcements. In contrast, once soldiers abandoned their posts, they became isolated wanderers without bases, supply lines, or backup. Stripped of their structural power and support systems, he concluded that such desperate deserters posed no real threat. Fapos finally understood his reasoning, feeling a quiet sense of pity for the disposable soldiers discarded by their own army. Though she acknowledged that turning to banditry was unacceptable, she still pitied their desperate circumstances. Hikum lightheartedly admitted his own unlawful conduct, leaving her silently worrying about the chaotic path ahead. Inside the quiet study, the hooded young mercenary accepted a heavy pouch of coin for suppressing the local bandits. He offered a polite word of thanks, while his noble employer hinted at another lucrative secret assignment on the horizon. He listened calmly as the Count praised his performance, remarking that defeating a former knight must have been nothing more than an effortless stroll in the park for someone of his standing. With a subtle smirk, he brushed off the grand compliment, insisting that his success was purely a stroke of good fortune rather than sheer martial prowess. Reflecting on their grueling journeys, his beastkin companion mused that enduring such constant hardships was simply an undeniable part of their profession. Turning his attention back to the correspondence, he noted that the formal letter addressed to the Count should provide more than enough satisfaction, suggesting they review it to brighten his mood. He pictured the overwhelming gratitude of those he had aided, realizing that an excess of devotion could easily become a rather complicated burden to manage. The Count burst into boisterous laughter at his modesty, asking how anyone could possibly reject such lavish praise before tossing a second full pouch across the desk. He stared down at the unexpected bonus with suspicion, asking if this additional coin was an advance payment for a brand new task, given that his current work was already fully settled. With a cunning grin, the nobleman confirmed his suspicions, announcing that an influential guest of noble blood would soon be arriving at the castle. He smirked with self-importance, praising his hired hand for proving so surprisingly useful. Beneath the shadow of his hood, Gaikaku quickly processed the noble's words, deducing that if a count referred to the guest as a noble, the incoming figure had to hold a position of tremendous power. Expanding on his arrogant speech, the noble offered a pouch of coin and instructed the mercenary to enjoy himself, adding curtly that commoners must strictly know their place when higher nobility arrives. Listening quietly to the condescending advice, the mercenary kept his composure, his calm gaze hidden in the shadows of his hooded cloak. Playing along with the pompous speech, he put on a dramatic show of agreement, mockingly declaring that it would indeed be an unforgivable disgrace for someone as lowly as himself to stand beside high nobility. Pleased with the mercenary's submissive display, the Count cheerfully sent him away, allowing the heavy wooden doors to shut firmly behind him. Once left alone, his pleasant demeanor vanished into a dark, sinister grin as he dismissed the departed young man as a naive small-timer. Stepping over to his desk, he retrieved a key, unlocked a hidden mechanism, and pulled open a secret drawer to reveal a rolled letter. The official document, addressed from Knight Commander Tetris, praised his supposed achievements against bandits and announced an invitation to join their honorable knightly ranks. Reading over the letter, anxiety began to gnaw at him as he realized the danger if Gaikaku ever discovered the invitation and demanded credit for his own deeds. He envisioned a humiliating scenario where the mercenary exposed the truth to his companions, potentially claiming the prestigious title of knight for himself. He reasoned in his lavish quarters that a money-obsessed scoundrel like Gaikaku should never receive a knighthood, convincing himself that someone of his own noble lineage was the only one truly worthy of such a prestigious rank. Looking ahead to the upcoming ceremony, he clasped his hands in delight, imagining how he would soon become the envy of everyone and claim the highest honor. With a smug, scheming grin creeping across his face, he swore to himself that he would definitely secure his place among the royal knights. Meanwhile, along a peaceful outdoor path, Gaikaku strolled cheerfully alongside his companions, completely oblivious to his employer's secret ambitions. He casually mentioned that Count Balak had told them to stay away for a while due to an important visitor, wondering aloud if having extra free time was supposed to be a good thing. Taking full advantage of the break from constant combat, he leaned in closer to Zashi with an eager grin and babbled endlessly about focusing on research, outlining plans to refine their buoyancy satchels and bone-enhanced armor. As she listened to his excited rambling, she recalled the rumor about Count Balak being invited to join the knights, wondering if the distinguished guest's visit was directly related. He dismissed her theory with a wave of his hand, convinced that no matter how foolish their noble employer was, even he would have the sense to reject such an arduous offer. In his mind, he pictured the Count sweating nervously, knowing the man would have to lie and flatly refuse the honor just to avoid exposing his own incompetence. Bursting into hearty laughter at the thought of a nobleman acting so disgracefully, he and Zashi mocked Balak's ridiculous behavior, only wishing they could be there in person to watch the humiliating rejection unfold. He and his companions paused along the stone street as an angry, shouting match broke out in front of a market stall. As they watched, an official guard confronted the shopkeeper, who indignantly brandished his merchant license and insisted he was merely selling goods acquired through standard channels. Holding up an official prohibition notice alongside a small glass vial, the guard firmly declared that the potion known as daiquiri was strictly illegal. The merchant slumped in dismay, protesting that it was his top-selling item, but the guard unsympathetically reminded him that illegal goods naturally brought enforcement. Around them, a crowd of townspeople voiced their frustration, insisting the medicine had cured their children and demanding an explanation if there were truly dangerous side effects. Observing the commotion quietly, he connected the dots, realizing that the suspicious medicine being seized across town was indeed the daiquiri potion. Beside him, the young elf turned with a thoughtful expression, noting how incredibly popular and lucrative the medicine seemed to be despite the controversy. She beamed with sudden excitement, enthusiastically suggesting that he step away from shady underworld dealings and launch his own legitimate pharmaceutical business instead. He let out an exasperated sigh, sweat dropping as he pointed out the obvious flaw in her plan while the merchant was being taken into custody right in front of them. Undeterred by his skepticism, she skipped alongside him, playfully insisting that a genius mage like him could easily concoct a powerful, completely legal remedy in no time. She continued to gush with enthusiasm, painting a vivid picture of legendary fame where people from across the kingdom would flock to become his apprentices if he went into the medicine business. Before she could finish her grandiose pitch, a sudden hesitation crept into her voice, prompting him to recall a distinctly familiar feeling of impending trouble. Just as she excitedly resolved to start manufacturing and selling remedies on the spot, he bluntly cut her off, reminding her that running such an enterprise was far from simple. Reality quickly set in as she envisioned the grueling labor required, imagining herself slaving over steaming bowls from morning until night just to produce enough inventory. Leaning in close with an unamused stare, he pressed her on whether she was truly prepared for such back-breaking toil, warning that it would be relentlessly brutal. With that dose of reality delivered, he calmly walked ahead, leaving her frozen in place as her brilliant plan crumbled around her. She grimly pictured an alternate reality where he ruled as a tyrannical master, amassing huge profits while working his slaves to the bone, rationalizing that such exploitation was expected for someone in her position. Catching up as they resumed their stroll down the alley, she hesitantly called out to him, prompting him to glance back with quiet curiosity. Gazing up at his knowing smirk, she openly wondered if he possessed the ability to read her mind. He explained that since she had taken the trouble to become his subordinate, he preferred to pursue endeavors that were clever and enjoyable, even if his ultimate priority remained his own amusement. He offered a calm, approving smile, and Zashi immediately beamed back at him, nodding enthusiastically in complete agreement with his decision. A few weeks passed, shifting the focus to Count Balak's bustling territory, where rumors and chatter filled the stone-paved streets. Townsfolk walked together in lively discussion, marveling at recent displays of incredible power that had left everyone thoroughly impressed. Meanwhile, high atop the city, the Grand Stone Fortress housed the elite order of knights, whose presence commanded absolute respect. Inside the castle corridor, a figure in gleaming white plate armor strode forward with quiet authority, steel boots echoing off the stone floor as a hand gripped a broadsword. As the armored warrior approached the end of the grand hall, Count Balak stood waiting, watching the imposing figure draw near. Standing tall and resolute, the noble female commander faced the count directly, resting her hand upon her vertical sword as she declared her intent to personally test his capabilities. With sharp, unyielding eyes, she issued a stark warning, informing him that she was about to strike and advising him to prepare his defenses. Terrified by her cold intensity, the sweat-drenched count gaped in utter shock, realizing with sheer panic that he had barely 5 seconds before a deadly blow landed. A look of sudden anxiety crosses Count Balak's face as the timeline rewinds to reveal the tense moments leading up to this confrontation. Within the realm, the military forces operate under a rigid command structure, governed at the absolute top by the Knight Commander, who commands elite forces and hundreds of junior knights. Stepping forward from the ranks of this legendary order, the Supreme Leader makes her presence known with a composed, formal greeting. She introduces herself as Testoria, the commander of the knights, radiating an unshakable poise that commands immediate respect. Her striking appearance and solemn demeanor underscore the sheer weight of authority she carries across the kingdom. Observing her in person, the noble struggles to maintain his composure, flushed and utterly dazzled by her captivating presence. Addressing him directly, the commander offers an apology for the disruption caused by her subordinates, though he hastens to assure her that no offense was taken. As they proceed inside, her loyal elf guard glares with violent intent at the count, barely holding back her urge to cut him down for his lingering, improper gaze. Dismissing her guards to conduct their conversation in private, Testoria leaves the count breathing a sigh of relief, though she privately muses that his good fortune will not last forever. She watched quietly as the count leaned forward in astonishment, unable to process her sudden proposition to recruit him directly into the Knight's Order. Confirming her offer with absolute composure, she explained that the Order was constantly seeking elite talent, assuring him that someone of his supposed achievements was more than welcome. With a subtle smile, she escalated the offer even further, proposing to confer upon him the prestigious title of Knight Commander. Her stunning proposal left the noble utterly dumbfounded, his mind racing as he realized she was offering him a top-tier leadership position rather than a mere enlistment. This unbelievable turn of events carried his mind back to his childhood, recalling how passionately he had once wished to train hard and earn the right to become a knight. Yet those memories were bitter, while others effortlessly demonstrated natural combat talent. He had spent over a year struggling without making any progress at all. Snapping back to reality with sweat dripping from his brow, he stammered in disbelief, questioning how a newcomer like himself could possibly be elevated above established veterans to lead an entire unit. Across the small table, she calmly addressed his doubts, pointing to his reported victory over Avier alongside his personal forces as more than sufficient justification. Elaborating on the full scope of her plan, she expressed a desire to officially knight his entire band of subordinates, placing the creation and command of an entire new order directly under his hands. As she softly confirmed her intentions, the count stared back with wide, sweating eyes, overwhelmed by the realization of what this offer truly entailed for him and his men. He immediately spiraled into a vivid fantasy, picturing himself as the grand commander of the knights, while that bizarre young man, Gaikaku, mocked him as his foolish subordinate. Below his daydream, the companions whispered among themselves, questioning how someone so visually unrefined could ever be considered knight material. The sudden realization that this odd wanderer might officially become his direct subordinate sent a cold sweat dripping down his pudgy face. Desperate to stop this outcome, he called out to the princess, watching nervously as her hand tightened with quiet composure. When she composedly inquired if there was an issue, he stammered that he had to correct a misstatement regarding his subordinates, revolted by the thought of elevating someone so lowly. He recalled how he had initially lied, claiming that he had defeated the renegade knight alongside his own men. Looking again at the carefree wanderer, he convinced himself that a man of such common stock could never carry out noble duties. Puffing out his chest with dramatic bravado, he blurted out that his previous report was a complete falsehood, declaring that he had single-handedly slain the enemies because none of his men possessed the strength required of a knight. The noble commander absorbed his sudden outburst in absolute silence, her expression unreadable. With a calm yet piercing gaze, she inquired why he had concocted such a lie in the first place, leaving him squirming under her scrutiny. Flustered and waving his hands wildly, he fabricated another excuse, claiming he felt embarrassed to admit he did everything alone while his men remained incompetent, to which she simply acknowledged his words with a soft response. He let out a quiet sigh of relief, relieved that the immediate suspicion had passed, before boldly requesting that once he was appointed commander, capable knights from other orders be assigned directly under his command. Acknowledging his request with formal composure, Testoria noted that before any commander appointments could be made, a few essential formalities regarding entry into the knightly order had to be confirmed. She reminded him that joining meant transitioning from someone receiving protection to someone providing it, asking if he possessed true readiness, to which he eagerly affirmed his readiness. Continuing her explanation, she made it clear that he would have to follow her explicit orders and serve under a commander far younger than himself, a condition he accepted with grand declarations of honor. Pressing further, she stared directly at him and asked if he was truly prepared to lay down his very life on the battlefield, prompting a boisterous promise from the ambitious noble. Praising his apparent resolve, she formally declared him her direct subordinate from that exact moment onward under her absolute authority as commander. As he celebrated in his mind that his dream of joining the order had finally come true, she calmly announced that it was time to issue her very first order. Eager to demonstrate his obedience, the plump noble bowed low and declared that he awaited her command with complete devotion. Suddenly, a sharp metallic scrape echoed through the room as she drew her sword, stating that she intended to test his martial strength firsthand. Standing firm with her blade raised in a combat stance, Testoria warned her newly minted subordinate to brace himself, promising an immediate full-force strike that he must block. She stood poised to strike, leaving the newly appointed knight paralyzed in complete disbelief as his eyes widened in sheer panic. Misinterpreting his stunned stammer as confirmation, she beamed with cheerful intensity and announced that she was coming at him. Terrified by her sudden advance, he waved his hands wildly, desperately pleading for her to wait and hold back. Without breaking her bright smile, she inquisitively pressed him, asking if his gestures meant he was readying a blade or beginning an incantation. Sweat poured down his face as he frantically searched for an escape, agonizing over the prospect of dying on his very first day in the order, while she resolutely asserted that verifying his prowess was her solemn duty as commander. Her gaze hardened into a piercing stare as she demanded that he demonstrate his true strength and prove he had defeated the threat entirely on his own. Observing his hesitation, she sternly reminded him that hesitation on a real battlefield led straight to death, causing a sudden wave of dread to wash over him as he realized his deception was about to be exposed. Overwhelmed by fear, he threw himself down into a desperate, prostrate bow, screaming out for her forgiveness. His sudden bow brought the lethal strike to a sudden, screeching halt. Tears streamed down his face as he blurted out the full truth, confessing that he had lied about defeating the enemy alone, had never set foot on the battlefield, and had merely taken the credit for his private troops' accomplishments in a desperate bid to win respect. As he cowered tearfully on the floor, the female commander revealed that she had known his secret all along, explaining that she had only visited out of courtesy to offer him and his men a place in the Knight's Order. She clarified that while he was under no obligation to report the whole truth, her gesture was purely formal, leaving the plump noble staring in utter bewilderment. Delivering her final verdict with sharp authority, The commander declared that anyone who feigned bravado during an interview could never be trusted, stating that only his capable subordinates would be recruited. Hearing those harsh words, his face contorted in shock and humiliation as the cold reality swept away any remaining delusions of grandeur. Bitterly realizing that his masked assistant was the true recipient of her favor while he was left with nothing, he listened silently as she requested that his subordinate be brought before her. When he burst into a furious tirade claiming he alone deserved knighthood, a sharp blade instantly pressed against his neck, cutting short his outburst and forcing a terrified agreement from his lips. A few days passed over the quiet noble grounds, bringing a brief lull after the chaotic confrontation. Resting in his private quarters, the noble pondered what new duties awaited him and who to assign them to, right as a soft knock rattled his chamber door. The door opened to reveal the calm, dark-haired youth in his traveling cloak, offering a pleasant greeting to his visibly startled master. Stepping into the room behind him, the regal female commander stood poised and commanding, casting a tall shadow over the trembling count. She introduced herself with poised confidence, announcing her position as Supreme Commander of the Kingdom's Knights before addressing Gaikaku Hikum directly to confirm his identity. Hearing such a prestigious title sent a jolt of shock through him, making him suddenly realize that the rumors about royal recruitment were entirely true. A wave of deep frustration swept over him as he understood how Count Balak had manipulated the situation to pass himself off as someone important. His anxiety spiraled further as he recalled his own recent clandestine actions, acutely aware that his methods were entirely outside the law. Noticing his visible distress, the commander quickly reassured him, clarifying that she had no intention of placing him under arrest. She went on to explain with a tranquil smile that her presence was driven solely by rumors of an extraordinary talent residing on the estate. Citing his remarkable record, she recounted how he had defeated Avier and efficiently resolved a staggering number of crises throughout the realm. He remained silent under her gaze, sweating nervously as her praise continued to pile on. With a glowing smile, she insisted that if such heroic deeds did not define true talent, nothing else could. She concluded by declaring that regardless of his official status as a simple messenger, he commanded her absolute respect. She smiled warmly at him as he began to realize the weight of her presence, feeling overwhelmed by what seemed like a monumental honor. Standing proudly as the Supreme Commander of the Knights Order, she called out his full name, Gaikaku Hikum, prompting an immediate surge of panic from him as he inwardly protested that he was completely ill-suited for such grand expectations. Extending her hand in an official posture, she grandly declared her intention to formally appoint him as a new captain of the Knights Order. Faced with such an overwhelming offer, he stared back at her in complete disbelief, his mind racing with panic as he realized this situation was far beyond anything he had bargained. He stood frozen in disbelief, a bead of cold sweat running down his cheek as the elf knight commander smiled warmly at him. Recovering his composure, he voiced his hesitation, pointing out that promoting him to knight captain so suddenly seemed unbelievable without any official background to back it up. She dismissed his concerns with a calm look, countering that there was no way someone could have achieved such extraordinary feats entirely on their own. Continuing with an analytical smile, she remarked that describing his unorthodox tactics as a magic trick was the most accurate summary, given how far from normal his methods truly were. While he listened with a side-eyed, indifferent glare, she promised not to pry deeper into his secrets, despite being well aware that much remained hidden beneath his calm facade. Rather than trying to force a solitary figure into an established squad, she presented her official decision. He would join under her direct personal order. She concluded that bringing his entire group under her unified command as an officially recognized knight order was the best and most logical course of action. She presented the option with an air of absolute composure, explicitly stating that he was free to refuse her offer. However, her tone quickly shifted as she explained the reality. His group would be assigned several mandatory missions, and only upon successful completion would they be officially inducted into the Knights. A chilling, coercive smile spread across her face as she laid down her ultimatum. Should he refuse or fail any of those missions, her forces would launch a full-scale formal investigation into him and his entire group, leaving him no genuine choice. Unable to openly defy the overwhelming pressure, he swallowed his frustration and politely requested time to consider her terms. She readily agreed with pleasant charm, assuring him that she eagerly awaited his response. Exiting the fortress through a quiet rear doorway, he made his way toward the secluded back entrance of the castle grounds where a trusted companion waited for him. Spotting his approach, the young elven companion brightened up immediately, welcoming her mentor back with enthusiastic warmth. Yet, instead of returning her cheer, he slumped forward under the crushing weight of panic, his face contorted in utter despair as he groaned aloud. As they began walking, she casually mentioned that the rumors were accurate and that their fraudulent frontman had indeed accepted the Night Order's proposition. He, however, cut her off in an anxious fury, explaining that the Night Order had exposed the frontman's incompetence and uncovered his own hidden existence in the process. Overwhelmed by anger toward his incompetent proxy, he gripped her shoulders tightly in his agitation, venting about how he had been thoroughly exposed, and ratted out. Sudden realization hit him mid-rant, causing him to freeze in his tracks and stare blankly back at his companion as a glaring logical flaw struck him. Turning to face her directly, he voiced the crucial question that had just occurred to him. If their cover was blown and their secret out, why was she still calmly standing there instead of preparing for the fallout? He explained that they had been given a brief window of time to discuss their options among themselves. She instantly leaped at the opportunity, insisting that refusal meant immediate arrest and celebrating his prospective appointment as Knight Commander. While she celebrated her childhood dream of becoming a revered knight, he fretted over the crushing expectations awaiting them among the elite ranks. Looking up at him with unshakable confidence, she declared her total faith in his ability to make the impossible happen. He could only sweat under the weight of her impossibly high expectations. She continued to shower him with praise, reminding him of his reputation as an extraordinary genius mage. A confident smirk crossed his face as he chided her for always leaving the hardest tasks to him. He admitted that facing an official investigation, or worse, getting caught and stripped of his freedom, was a far worse alternative. Resolving to take charge, he declared that he would take on the role of Knight Commander, prompting a delighted cheer from her. Yet as they laughed together, he quietly pointed out that, in their current state, actually fulfilling such grand duties was still far beyond their reach. He had accepted the grave responsibility within the grand stone walls of the fortress, setting a tense new chapter in motion behind its formidable ramparts. Deep within the castle's quiet bath chambers, the gentle splash of water echoed as female attendants tended to their mistress, carefully checking if she was comfortable. Relaxing into the warm water as her aides gently washed her shoulders, Testoria reassured them with a serene smile that she was feeling completely at ease. Hesitantly, one of the attendants broke the calm atmosphere to address Lady Testoria directly about her lingering worries. She expressed her disapproval of the recent decision, arguing that taking the newcomer into the order carried immense risk and could tarnish Testoria's immaculate reputation, regardless of his victory over Avial. Testoria offered a quiet, knowing smile and frankly confessed that she felt little affection for the order as a whole, acknowledging her own lingering distrust regarding their unpredictable motives. Turning her gaze toward them, she emphasized that her true trust resided not in distant commanders, but in her personal knights who stood faithfully at her side. Her attendants then shared the findings of their investigation, reporting that no evidence of major crimes or sinister conduct had been uncovered in Balak's territory. They concluded that such restraint demonstrated a clear sense of discipline and awareness, proving that the newcomers group was capable of acting with calculated control. Outside the chambers, whispers circulated through the corridors regarding rumors that his companions were utterly lacking in combat power and strength. His ability to produce remarkable achievements using supposedly weak subordinates surprised even Lady Testoria. Stepping out from the warm bath waters, the elven commander listened as her attendants voiced their doubts about the accuracy of those reports. As she dried off, Testoria boldly suggested that his genius might surpass even her own, sparking immediate protests from her loyal squad. Looking back over her shoulder, she quietly admitted that despite their skepticism, her expectations for him remained exceedingly high. Far from the bathhouse, the black-haired strategist himself was confronted with a grim reality that demanded his full attention. Walking alongside his companions in the open air, a heavy silence underscored the magnitude of their upcoming challenge. His subordinate pressed him about their situation, noting that if they wanted to accept official missions from the Night Order, their group severely lacked offensive capability. She pointed out that while they used to purchase slaves and train them gradually with magical armaments, time was no longer on their side. He emphasized that they urgently needed capable, battle-ready fighters in high numbers, alarming his companion with the sheer scale of the crisis. With a subtle glint of confidence in his eye, he revealed that he already had a specific recruit in mind. He reflected on their situation as they entered the human realm, considering how best to navigate the unfamiliar territory. Reasoning that a local guild would be the ideal place to recruit battle-ready fighters, he set off to find capable mercenaries for hire. Upon arriving at the guild, however, his attention was immediately drawn to a pair of dubious men cornering a group of seated adventurers. Wearing greasy grins, the pair relentlessly badgered the women, begging for a favor despite the clear discomfort they were causing. As the three armored female warriors endured the harassment with visible annoyance, he watched from a distance, recognizing the questionable nature of the interaction. Recalling the bright days of the past, the young commander remembered how her mercenary corps was first formed, built on high ideals and fierce determination. Before a crowd of 100 women, she had proudly declared the birth of the Amazon Mercenary Corps, raising her blade to champion their grand vision. Years later in the present day, those grand dreams had given way to a modest manor sitting quietly in the countryside. Inside, sinister figures gathered, their mocking expressions reflecting the cruel turn her life had taken. The commander could only listen in dismay, her sharp gaze trembling beneath the crushing weight of reality. She couldn't help but recall how her subordinates had deserted her one by one, intimidated by the scale of the group and unwilling to fight real battles. Holding a stack of unpaid debt notes, she sat ruined by the fact that not a single client had ever hired them, leaving her with massive loans taken out just to keep her women fed. The relentless collection agents sneered as they demanded immediate payment, callously suggesting she work off the debt with 5 years of hard labor in the mines. Just as their extortion reached its peak, a sudden disturbance at the entrance caught her off guard, drawing her gaze toward an unexpected newcomer. She stared in utter disbelief as a hooded young man strode boldly through the doorway, his sudden arrival echoing through the room as he announced his intent to hire mercenaries. Walking straight past the astonished onlookers, he closed the distance between them, leaving her wide-eyed and speechless. Leaning in uncomfortably close, he demanded to know if she was a mercenary, receiving only a hesitant, stammered confirmation in return. Without wasting a breath, he handed her a set of papers before casually tossing a heavy pouch of gold onto the creditor's desk, asking if the sum was sufficient to clear her obligations. Turning back to her, he stated plainly that he had paid off every coin of her debt, ordering her to assemble her force and follow him immediately. Before she could even process the sudden turn of events, he grabbed her hand and urged her forward, leaving her completely baffled. As he led her out of the hall, the remaining mercenaries hastily scrambled to join them, whispering among themselves about whether this sudden arrangement was truly real. Looking back over his shoulder, he confirmed that he was hiring every single member of the corps, all 100 of them, much to the delight of the creditor, who praised his own good fortune. Soon, the entire troop was marching along a quiet wooded path, their minds racing with lingering questions about the true nature of the assignment they had just accepted. Walking alongside her fellow officers, they whispered back and forth about the sudden rush job, wondering if a major war was on the horizon or if their new benefactor possessed secret knowledge of impending danger. She stood alongside her inner circle, explaining that their mystery client had promised full details once they reached the assembly point, while the quiet young man walked beside them in silence. Under the light of a full moon, the entire corps of female mercenaries made their way through the shadowed forest clearing toward the gathering spot. Stepping forward, the young benefactor called out to the group, instructing everyone to gather closely around as the officers turned to listen. Ascending a small wooden platform, he looked out across the impressive crowd of assembled fighters, confirming that every single member was present. In flawless military discipline, The 100 women responded in unison, their attention fully locked on the stage. He began his address by recounting their history, noting how long they had operated as Count Balak's private force and executed countless dangerous duties. Highlighting their formidable combat record, he praised their ability to overcome diverse and powerful enemies across many battlefields, including humans, elves, and ogres. With their reputation acknowledged, he revealed that a new benefactor sought to recruit them, unfurling a long, wrapped staff to present a symbol of serious intent. Unrolling a grand banner displaying a knightly crest, he loudly announced that Lady Testoria intended to officially reform their mercenary band into a new knight order. The sudden declaration sent a wave of shock through Testoria and her officers, leaving them wide-eyed and speechlessly grappling with the magnitude of the news. She understood all too well that accepting formal recognition meant facing overwhelming foes, as legendary monsters and rival commanders would now seek their destruction. Because of this newfound standing, untold numbers of enemy warriors eager for glory would relentlessly hunt them down. Looking out at the hesitant ranks, the dark-haired youth bluntly reminded them that untrained commoners assuming the mantle of knights would fall in an instant. He then struck a confident pose, proudly proclaiming that they had nothing to fear as long as they had him, a genius spellcaster selected by their very own leader. Reassuring the squad, he promised to keep forging their weapons and devising flawless strategies, swearing that no one under his command would fall. Fired up by his confidence, the elven commander tightly gripped the staff of their new banner and exhorted all 100 members to strive for relentless, unbroken victory. With that impassioned cry, the newly christened unit officially cast aside their humble origins and declared their ascent to the world. In response, the surrounding soldiers raised their fists and cheered in unison, swept up in the electric excitement of the moment. As the uproar subsided, a few of the younger fighters whispered amongst themselves, questioning the unusually modest title bestowed upon their order. While the group pressed onward with renewed high spirits, one of the girls sheepishly suggested that their tactician consider picking a slightly more dignified name. He led the young elven knight toward the castle's secluded back entrance, advising her to wait as they approached. Before she could register their destination, he turned back suddenly and instructed her to follow him inside. Surprised by his command, she quickly voiced her agreement as he reminded her that as part of an official knight order, she needed to meet the person in command. As they proceeded through the corridors, she pondered the reputation of the legendary commander, famous for both her strength and beauty, right up until he knocked at the heavy entrance door. Upon opening the door, they stepped into a spacious reception room where the commander sat comfortably on a plush couch, flanked by her stern officers. Looking up with a confident and inviting expression, the commander acknowledged their arrival, revealing she had been expecting them. She warmly extended a gesture of hospitality, inviting the visitors to take a seat opposite her. On the adjacent table rested polished ceremonial weapons and ornate tankards, radiating the prestige of high military standing. Seeing the grand setup, the young companion stood in awe next to him, realizing how vastly different this world of elite knights was from her own. Fixing her sharp gaze upon them, the commander directly inquired whether their presence meant they were officially accepting her invitation. She awaited his response, and without hesitation, he affirmed his resolve, declaring that his mind was already firmly made up. He had spoken with certainty, but the knight commander gently reminded them that even her approval did not mean everyone in the order agreed. Skeptics within the higher ranks remained doubtful, insisting on concrete proof that their touted achievements were not mere fabrications. Upon hearing the official proposal, his young companion gasped in astonishment, overwhelmed to learn that 2 special requests were being entrusted to them. She stood beside him in disbelief, realizing she was being granted the extraordinary chance to officially become a knight. Her heart swelled with pride at the thought of serving in the order under his guidance, though the immense responsibility soon weighed on her. The commander reminded her that knighthood was not a simple task to complete and set aside, but a continuous path of duty. With a sharp, commanding gesture, she reinforced the absolute seriousness of the commitment they were undertaking. Their performance would be strictly evaluated against the formidable standards of the other knightly orders, and failure to match them would mean disqualification. Facing her unwavering sternness, He answered with absolute confidence, accepting every single term of the trial without hesitation. He stood unflinching as Lady Testoria laid out her absurd condition. They were tasked with capturing an entire stronghold. Not only that, but the massive fortification had to fall within a single day. Looking down at them with a challenging smirk, the Knight Commander taunted them, asking if such a daunting assignment was beyond their capabilities. Overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the objective, the young Knight candidate panicked, turning to her mentor in disbelief to question if seizing a fortress in 24 hours was even possible. Without a flicker of doubt, he simply smiled, his eyes gleaming with unshakable authority and power as he accepted the terms, declaring the task as good as done. High atop a grassy hillside stood the enemy's stone fortress, an imposing stronghold commanding a view over the surrounding lands. Nearby, a temporary encampment of canvas tents had been erected to quarter the forces preparing for the upcoming operation. Inside the main war tent, the commanders and key fighters gathered around a strategic map table to deliberate their options. Assessing the layout, the young knight candidate pointed out that the stronghold likely contained around 200 soldiers, prompting Testoria to suggest that luring the enemy garrison out into the open field was their best chance of victory. However, looking upon the towering stone walls, everyone understood that if the enemy chose to entrench themselves behind those fortifications, a direct assault would be suicidal. The surrounding terrain presented another severe obstacle, as the wide, open landscape left no cover, ensuring any large advancing army would be spotted immediately before a surprise attack could be launched. Without the element of surprise, a frontal push across the open fields would inevitably turn the engagement into a grueling siege while under constant fire from the ramparts. They realized that attempting to take the stronghold in a single day would result in their complete destruction, leaving them unable to win unless they could hire mercenaries to swell their forces. She listened intently as her strategist smirked, clearly having anticipated the precise tactical dilemma they were currently facing. Her companion pointed out that if the garrison holed up for a siege, it offered a chance to wipe them out at once, though doing so would normally require hiring mercenaries. He confidently countered that their newly improved magic weapons, combined with the tactical scheme he had devised, would make their existing forces more than sufficient for victory. The sudden reassurance left both women wide-eyed with relief, realizing he had already planned several moves ahead. Meanwhile, atop a distant hill stood the enemy fortress, an old stronghold once built to control a vital crossroads, though changing borders had long since rendered it obsolete. In present times, the fort served only as a quiet training center for green recruits and new officers, where a guard suddenly rushed down the corridor toward the commander's quarters. Annoyed by the intrusion, Commander Toriman reprimanded the soldier for barging in without warning, demanding that he display far more poise and composure in his duties. The guard froze upon noticing a scantily clad woman lounging on the commander's bed, questioning if it was appropriate to bring guests into his quarters during duty hours. He casually brushed off the criticism, offering the absurd excuse that having beautiful company nearby simply enhanced his work efficiency while on duty. The guard finally delivered the urgent news that an enemy attack was underway, which piqued the commander's curiosity as he demanded immediate details on the rare event. He listened as his scout reported 3 infantry groups totaling roughly 100 men approaching from the southwest, east, and west sides of the southern fort. Added to that force were roughly 20 armed ogres advancing from the north. When an officer asked if they should march out and strike first since no siege engines were spotted, he dismissed the idea as absurd. 100 well-coordinated soldiers could handle 20 ogres on their own, but predicting the battle became far more complex with human allies fighting beside them. Sallying forth all 200 defenders could still result in defeat. Even a victory out in the open field would cost too many lives, so he ordered the main gate sealed and his garrison stationed atop the ramparts instead. As the subordinate rushed off to relay his command, the defenders gathered along the battlements, confident that this was merely a minor skirmish and that a few volleys of arrows would scatter the enemy force. Heavy wooden doors swung shut, locking the fortress entrance securely against any direct breach. Looking up from outside, the attackers observed around 100 enemy soldiers lining the walls, looking thoroughly smug in their belief that no siege weapons were present to threaten them. Behind the vanguard, the remaining century of defenders stayed positioned deep within the courtyard, kept in reserve to reinforce the walls if necessary. Observing through a spyglass, the strategist smiled as everything went according to plan, while his companion cheered that the defenders had walked right into their trap by holing up inside the fortress. He observed the enemy forces tightly packed inside the fortress walls, around 200 soldiers, including human troops and ogres, refusing to budge an inch. While they believed remaining defensive would spare them from defeat, this decision to stay cooped up was precisely the mistake that would cost them their lives. To capitalize on their stationary defense, the unit deployed improved composite magic-powered turrets around the perimeter, with Hamura taking up position alongside the advanced artillery. Positioned atop one of the platforms, Lady Testoria prepared to lend her energy to the bombardment, knowing this unique standoff demanded their most formidable long-range power. Yet, hitting a distant target with high precision was never a simple endeavor. Even under ideal practice conditions, physical projectiles like arrows and bullets are constantly pulled off course by wind and gravity, preventing them from traveling in a true straight line. As the distance increases, hitting a mark becomes exponentially harder, a limitation that normally applies to magical projectiles as well. Though not even a skilled elven knight could land a magic strike from such extreme range, these composite cannons operated differently, firing guided shells directly to pre-marked coordinates. With the optical scope locking onto the target zone, the custom rifle glinted as it prepared to send out the homing signal. A glowing magic targeting sigil suddenly materialized beneath the boots of the unsuspecting guards stationed along the fortress ramparts. As he watched the sigil lock onto the stationary guards, a sinister grin crossed his face, knowing that their refusal to move made every incoming blast completely unavoidable. He gave the signal as his light artillery weapons unleashed a relentless barrage of guided magic rounds, each projectile streaking toward the fortress with absolute precision. High above the battlefield, the glowing shells arced over the distance, descending rapidly onto the completely oblivious defenders stationed along the upper ramparts. The instant they made contact, catastrophic explosions rocked the stonework, sending blast waves and heavy masonry tearing through the bewildered guard formation. Surviving soldiers stumbled through the rising smoke in pure terror, shouting to one another in confusion as to how an attack could land when the enemy army had not even taken a single step forward. Watching the perfect hit register on the enemy's positions, Hamura grinned with fierce satisfaction alongside her beastfolk allies, knowing their moment to breach had arrived. With boundless energy, she and her specialized camouflage-clad squad vaulted into motion beside massive armored behemoths, bellowing for the rest of the forces to leave the vanguard assault to them. Spurred on by her battle cry, the agile strike team bounded across the shattered defenses and scrambled up the interior stairs with blinding speed. Inside the fortress corridors, the disorganized defenders scrambled in shock to form a blockade, but their desperate shouts only underscored their complete lack of preparation against such rapid infiltrators. Before any defensive line could coalesce, tactical flash explosives detonated among the guards, blowing them off their feet and blinding the survivors in a cloud of smoke. Emerging from the smoke with a confident smirk, she primed a pair of spherical explosive charges in her hands, ready to finish off the remaining defense. She sprinted past the startled enemy guard, dropping spherical explosive charges onto the stone deck behind her before he could react to her presence. As the metal orbs bounced loudly against the paving stones, the defenders shouted in confusion, scrambling backward in a desperate attempt to capture the swift infiltrators. The fuses on the firebombs sparked ominously, prompting a terrified cry from the guards as they finally realized the deadly nature of the rolling spheres. Positioned near the rampart wall, the young beastfolk warrior watched the widespread chaos unfold, shocked to realize that firebombs were raining down everywhere inside the fortress and leaving no path for escape. Seconds later, a colossal detonation tore through the stone corridor, spewing fire and force that hurled defenders through the air. Amid the clearing smoke, her sharp eyes caught sight of a stray projectile hurtling down and embedding itself into the ground directly in front of her. Before she could dodge, a violent shockwave burst upward from the landing site, swirling wind and debris directly into her path. The concussive blast knocked her onto her stomach, leaving her sprawled across the scorched rubble and groaning in agony. Standing above the fallen vanguard, a vengeful fortress guard leveled his spear, growling curses and swearing that she would pay for the destruction. Weakened and pinned to the dirt, she glared back up at her assailant, gritting her teeth against the searing pain as she struggled to push herself back to her feet. While she and her allies keep the defenders off balance, heavy wooden ladders rattle violently against the high stone walls of the fortress. A lone sentry stammers in terror as armored attackers scale the rungs with terrifying speed, breaching the upper parapets before any defense can be organized. Reaching the crest of the ramparts, Lady Testoria rallies her knights, shouting for them to press the assault without giving the enemy a moment to recover. Her subordinate eagerly confirms the order, ready to sweep the battlements clean. Deep inside the central keep, Commander Toraiman remains entirely unbothered, casually flirting with a companion and insisting his standing orders will suffice to handle any minor disturbance. Back on the battlements, the defenders' composure shatters completely as wounded soldiers stumble back in panic, realizing the sheer extent of the breach. Cries of alarm echo across the courtyard as smoke rises over the outer walls, with guards shouting in desperation that the stronghold is on the verge of total collapse. The invading forces swarm the elevated walkways, quickly disarming and binding the surviving guards to establish an unbreakable foothold on the upper walls. Finally looking out from his balcony, the commander pales in horror as he witnesses the vast sea of enemy troops, realizing with sickening dread that this is no mere training exercise. Under normal circumstances, mounting ladders against such formidable stone ramparts would be a suicidal task. Yet once the crest is taken, the fortress's doom is sealed. Observing the unfolding triumph from a high vantage point through his spyglass, Hikum smiles with supreme confidence, knowing that the battle has already been decided. In a sudden burst of deadly speed, the defending guards are brutally cut down in a flash of unseen steel, collapsing onto the courtyard stones. High above the stronghold, the entire fortress is engulfed in chaos as panicked cries reverberate across the walls, declaring that their forces are rapidly collapsing and the stronghold is on the verge of total destruction. Amidst the mounting panic, a terrified soldier rushes toward Commander Toraiman, urgently directing his attention toward the disaster unfolding at the defensive line. Over at the heavy north gate, soldiers scramble frantically as violent impacts shudder through the wooden doors, shouting warnings that enemy forces are trying to force their way inside. Processing the horrifying reports, he stares at the battle report in disbelief, learning that 20 formidable ogres are breaking through the northern wall, while the guards desperately order everyone to hold the line at all costs. Moments later, the heavy wooden barriers give way, allowing giant, masked ogres draped in rough furs to breach the courtyard. One of the massive beasts looms ominously over a helpless defender, raising a formidable weapon with lethal intent. Witnessing the brutal monstrous horde storm past their defenses, he stands frozen in sheer terror, completely speechless as panic takes hold. Overcome by despair, he shouted his total surrender across the fortress grounds as the enemy forces completely overran the northern defenses. Following his capitulation, the garrison's remaining troops were disarmed and assembled in orderly formations within the central courtyard under guard. Sitting cross-legged upon the stone paving, the defeated commander could only stare blankly, stripped of his authority and forced to accept the swift fall of his post. Stepping forward to survey the captured stronghold, the young hooded leader praised his allies for securing a complete and decisive takeover of the fortress. The surrounding officers exchanged relieved smiles as they reported the battle's outcome, confirming that despite a minor injury to one beastkin fighter, they had achieved complete victory with 0 fatalities. Overhearing this impossible truth, the stunned former commander burst into outrage, demanding to know what kind of trick allowed them to take a major fortress without suffering a single loss. Ignoring his bewildered outbursts, the young strategist declared their first mission fully accomplished and called for a grand feast, prompting thunderous cheers from the assembled troops. High above the conquered ramparts, a new banner bearing a mounted knight was raised into the sky, signaling the start of a new administration over the stronghold. Beyond the perimeter walls, a lone observer lowered his spyglass in utter disbelief, unable to fathom how the formidable fortress had fallen in just one single day. As night blanketed the keep, roaring bonfires illuminated the courtyard where the victorious army celebrated their flawless triumph late into the evening. Inside the conquered fortress, a spirit of triumphant celebration erupted as the fighters raised their glasses to a flawless victory. Grouped together in high spirits, the women recounted the glory of the assault. Some marveled at how quickly the enemy garrison surrendered the moment they breached the gates, while the artillery corps cheered over the devastating impact of their high-trajectory grenade barrages, convinced that fame and glory were now within their grasp. Under the cool night air, the warriors rested on fallen logs, reflecting on the sheer impossibility of taking a major stronghold in a single day. The extraordinary power of their new magical weaponry had transformed the battle into an unprecedented success, leaving everyone contemplating what greater feats might lay ahead. One young candidate looked up thoughtfully, voicing a dream that had long burnt within her heart, wondering aloud if this monumental triumph meant they might finally earn a place in the prestigious Knight's Order. Whispers of long-held aspirations rippled through the ranks as the recruits gazed upon the newly hoisted banner fluttering triumphantly against the backdrop of a bright full moon. Turning their conversation toward their leader, Garaku Hikum, the women candidly shared their initial impressions. Though many had originally found him suspicious and untrustworthy, his strategic brilliance and decisive execution had thoroughly earned their respect. As the glowing moon hung high above the courtyard, they admitted that despite initial apprehensions about serving under a commander surrounded entirely by women, he had proven impeccably professional, never attempting to cross any romantic boundaries. Interrupting the praise, one of the fighters leaned in inquisitively, pressing Testoria and her inner circle to confirm that none of them were secretly involved with him either. With a sly smile, Testoria confessed that they had, in fact, gotten completely carried away in passion with him following their previous victory, leaving the surrounding listeners completely dumbfounded by the unexpected revelation. Her bold admission brought enthusiastic agreement from the young recruit, who cheerfully insisted that their recent triumph was entirely owed to the chief. Listening to these passionate declarations, the dark-haired warrior couldn't help but feel flustered, contemplating whether she too should pay a private visit to their commander. Sitting among her companions, the mercenary realized that since they were merely hired hands for this contract, failing to take the initiative might leave them behind in the end. The looming dread of being dismissed from service weighed heavily on their minds, sharpening the urgency of their situation. Driven by this realization, Amartya decisively bolted to her feet and volunteered to go herself, brushing off her friend's startled protests as she seized what she saw as their greatest opportunity. With a sharp, resolute smile, she assured her companions that she would handle everything, determined not to let such a rare chance slip through her fingers. Meanwhile, quiet fell over the commander's quarters as he sat focused at his desk, meticulously analyzing technical blueprints to upgrade his gear, weighing adjustments to outer shells, air sacs, and shock-absorbing boots. His intense concentration was broken when a sudden, measured knock echoed against the wooden door of his study. Turning back toward the doorway in mild surprise, he began to call out to his unexpected visitor, unaware of who was standing on the other side. He stood stunned as Amartya offered herself to him, her posture tense and her eyes glistening with anxious resolve. Sensing her deep hesitation, he watched as she flinched, her flushed cheeks betraying how much distress this grand gesture was causing her. In response, he unfastened his dark cloak and moved forward to drape it softly across her exposed shoulders. Surprised by his chivalrous act, her eyes widened in complete disbelief as the warmth of his garment enveloped her. Pulling the edges tightly around her to ensure she was fully covered, he prompted a soft, bewildered gasp from her lips. Raising his voice in frustration, he made it explicitly clear that he had zero interest in forcing himself upon a woman acting against her own desire. He continued to scold her, pointing out that her terrified expression made this encounter feel more like a cruel punishment than anything else. Clutching his cloak tight, she finally confessed her fears, explaining that as mere mercenaries, her companions faced abandonment once the campaign ended, prompting her desperate bid to join the Knight's Order. Hearing her confession, He sternly asked if selling her dignity for a title was truly something she could ever take pride in. He bade her to imagine standing before innocent children who admired the order, asking if she could ever look them in the eye and answer honestly about how she earned her place. He gently pointed out that she had become blinded by the immediate glory right in front of her, asking if this was truly what her original dream was about. Amartya lowered her gaze, softly admitting that he was right. Turning back to face her, he confessed that he had also been swept up in the thrill of victory, forgetting to clarify what lay ahead for her and her mercenary companions. He reminded her that she had already proven her skills were more than worthy of trust, emphasizing how invaluable her presence and tactical versatility would be to their cause. Looking at her directly, he offered her a place by his side, inviting her to officially join his forces and lend her strength to the battles ahead. Her eyes filled with emotion and newfound resolve. She smiled brightly and gave a spirited response, eagerly accepting his offer. Ordering her to rest for the day, he warned her never to appear in such revealing attire again, leaving her clutching his coat in flustered obedience. Meanwhile, on a distant battlefield, a gigantic executioner wielding an enormous battle axe stood looming over a resolute knight. With a blood-curdling roar, the monstrous brute lunged forward, pouring all his destructive force into a crushing attack. The defender tried to withstand the assault, but her sword wedged tightly into the enemy's guard, leaving her helpless as the giant seized her in his iron grip. Suddenly, a shadow fell from above as a mysterious warrior plummeted through the air, launching a desperate surprise attack to strike the giant down. As the battle reaches its climax, vast magical crests materialize in midair, casting an ethereal glow over the field as an immense spell is prepared. The magical strike detonates with catastrophic force, sending shockwaves through the air and obliterating everything in a hemisphere of destructive light. When the swirling dust finally settles before the grand fortress gates, Lady Testoria stands alone amidst the fallen, perfectly composed as Commander Toriman strides out to meet her. He commends her effortless solo conquest of the stronghold, but she remains unimpressed, brushing aside his praise and demanding an immediate update on the situation at hand. Shifting his report to their allies, he informs her that Garaku Hikum and his group succeeded in seizing their designated fortress within a single day as well. Unsurprised by the news, she calmly acknowledges their success and declares that it is time to move forward with the next stage of their trial. The new objective involves a dangerous, illegal operation centered on manufacturing and distributing an illicit drug known as Dakara, masterminded by a shadowy rogue mage. As they review the briefing on exterminating the rogue mage, they recognize that this assignment may prove far more perilous than capturing a fortified castle. Elsewhere, a sinister figure glares at a framed portrait of Lady Testoria, scheming cunningly as he notes that her upcoming target crosses dangerously into his own affairs. Entering the boundaries of the Borealis barony, a grand nightly procession marched forward under towering banners, determined to restore order to the troubled province. Observing from the ranks, the knight commander beamed with pride and excitement at the spirited display of their forces. However, the atmosphere shifted dramatically upon encountering the local villagers, whose frail bodies and bandaged limbs revealed the harsh reality of their suffering. Deeply affected by their plight, she listened in solemn silence as a wounded elder desperately begged the order to protect their endangered homeland. Seeking to confer with the local authority, the knight delegation proceeded directly to the grand estate overlooking the domain, the residence of Baron Borealis. Inside the quiet mansion, a head butler led the visiting party through the opulent corridors, informing them that his master was waiting inside. Stepping into the bedchamber, she gasped as a weak, trembling voice emerged from the bed curtains, offering heartfelt thanks for their long journey. Bedridden and coughing heavily, young Baron Borealis offered a faint apology for being unable to welcome them in proper health. He welcomed the visiting delegation into his audience chamber, where the young instructor expressed deep gratitude for the meeting while commending his steadfast dedication to the domain. Mindful of protocol, the instructor humbly offered to discuss matters with a steward or butler instead, but the Lord insisted on recounting the origins of their crisis himself. As the Lord began his tale, He described how a mysterious mage named Tanru had arrived in the territory offering a miracle drug called Dakara, which seemingly cured the previous ruler's illness. Overjoyed by the apparent cure, the former lord rewarded the mage with full permission to cultivate herbs and market the medicine freely, unaware of the trap being laid. Listening closely to the account, the black-haired instructor interjected with a grim realization, noting that Dakara was nothing more than a potent painkiller. Because the drug provided immediate pain relief, local physicians soon fell into a dangerous habit of blindly prescribing it for any unknown ailment. As a consequence, countless patients wrongly assumed they were fully healed, while their underlying illnesses silently worsened until it was too late. Recognizing the tragic nature of the deceptive medicine, the authorities eventually outlawed its creation, though the widespread harm had already taken its toll. When the former lord finally realized how thoroughly they had been deceived, he immediately dispatched forces to arrest the treacherous mage. However, their retaliation was swiftly crushed, as Tanru had already assembled a massive, formidable military force to seize control of the barony. His father had fallen honorably in battle, leaving behind only a framed portrait as a silent reminder of the tragedy that had struck the domain. Upon hearing that the domain's soldiers had been utterly defeated and forced into retreat, Lady Testoria stared in utter disbelief. Following that devastating loss, the young Lord Allura had succeeded to the title of Baron, yet avenging his father's demise had proven far beyond his modest forces. While the rogue's private army ran rampant through the countryside, the domain's weakened guards could only watch helplessly as innocent villagers were snatched from their homes. Left with no other alternative, the loyal retainer bowed low alongside his bedridden master, desperately pleading for the knights to intervene. Tears welled in the young baron's eyes as he begged them to prove that justice still endured within their land. Stepping forward with unwavering resolve, Gaikaku placed his hand over his heart and formally announced that, in the name of the Knight's Order, he would take full responsibility for resolving the crisis. Overcome with profound relief at the knight's promise, the young lord collapsed back onto his pillows, his frail body finally letting go of the unbearable tension. Assuring the exhausted noble that he could rest easy, the young knight prepared to turn his attention toward confronting the enemy. Meanwhile, outside, a rough soldier whipped his head around in sudden alarm as word of the knight's presence began to spread. At Tanru's base of operations, armed overseers cracked their whips without mercy, driving captured villagers to complete back-breaking labor under harsh Amidst the mistreatment of the captives, Tanru the mage bursts into manic laughter, delighted by the long-awaited news that his foes have finally arrived. As he rushes through the corridor in a frenzy, he collides with a weak, unclothed female captive, shoving her violently to the floor while she stammers an apology. He glares down at her in sudden rage, bellowing that an insignificant captive should never dare obstruct the path of a brilliant mage such as himself. He kicks her aside like rubbish, sneering that a simple country bumpkin should learn basic courtesy toward her superiors before striding past her. His arrogant demeanor quickly turns to urgent concern as he realizes the imminent danger posed by the advancing enemy forces. Bursting through the heavy exterior doors into the open courtyard, he shouts at his men to hurry and prepare for the impending clash. Outside, the noble banner of the Knight's Order ripples boldly in the wind, heralding the arrival of justice. Led by Gaikaku and Lady Testoria, the armed vanguard marches resolutely into Tanru's stronghold, ready to liberate the captives and punish the wicked. He watched silently as Tanru erupted into an ecstatic frenzy, convinced that the approaching forces were envoys sent by Lady Testoria to recruit him into her service. Flamboyantly throwing his arms wide, the mage boasted that his brilliance allowed him to understand Lady Testoria's true desires, deluding himself into thinking she had acknowledged his efforts despite his remote location, while the captive villagers watched in stunned silence. Throwing his head back with a maniacal laugh, he declared that his grand rise to glory and recognition was officially beginning at last. Lowering his hood to reveal a sharp, calm gaze, the young swordsman abruptly shattered the villain's fantasy, dryly apologizing for ruining his little speech before clarifying that recruitment was never their objective. He gestured toward the bound villagers and heavily loaded wagon, bluntly informing the mage that his terrible reputation and cruel exploits were known to him. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Lady Testoria and their formidable allies, he announced that they had arrived under the direct command of Testoria herself. With a cold smile, he revealed their true purpose: to bring Tanru down once and for all, leaving the mage reeling in complete shock as he screamed that Lady Testoria would never issue such an order. Completely unable to process the truth, Tanru hysterically denounced them as fake knights, shouting that he would sever their heads and present them alongside their counterfeit banner as an offering. His eyes wide with unhinged madness and a manic grin spread across his face, he convinced himself that bringing Testoria the bloody heads of these intruders would surely earn her praise. He screamed in a fit of wild rage, barking orders for every last one of his thralls to attack. As he asserted his self-proclaimed authority, massive figures began to rise from the shadows, compelled by his delusional demands. Heavy, bone-shaking footsteps echoed through the hall, causing the companions to halt in sudden confusion. Towering hulks of unnaturally swollen muscle blocked their path, leaving the young knight candidate to question whether these monstrosities were even human. Observing their grotesque physiques, he calmly deduced that the men had been injected with Hothilt, a dangerous muscle-enhancing drug known to drastically shorten a person's lifespan. Hearing this accurate assessment, he gleefully admitted to reviving the banned substance, mocking the strategist's surprisingly deep knowledge of forbidden alchemy. Continuing his boastful speech, he revealed that repeated doses had transformed ordinary men into creatures possessing the raw power of ogres. Driven by unhinged ambition, he produced a syringe filled with a potent, instant-acting booster drug. With a wide, psychotic grin, he prepared to administer the violent formula to himself. Without a moment of hesitation, he plunged the needle deep into his own flesh, unleashing the unstable magic into his bloodstream. His dosage took immediate effect, causing veins to bulge wildly around bloodshot eyes as the dark energy surged through the test subjects. As the potion tore through their veins, their muscles expanded unnaturally, swelling into monstrous, rock-hard bulges that split skin and armor alike. The suffocating pressure radiating from the beasts left the young knight frozen in place, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror at the grotesque transformation unfolding before her. Throwing his arms wide with ecstatic madness, Tanru declared that these enhanced thralls would be pushed beyond human limits, elevating their combat strength all the way to elite ogre status. Standing tall with sinister, toothy grins, the towering brute thralls exhaled waves of scorching vapor, fully intoxicated by their newfound, grotesque power. Overwhelmed by the terrifying aura of elite ogres, the young knight and her comrades began to despair, openly questioning how anyone could hope to stand against such monstrous strength. The muscular thralls gloated among themselves, boasting that the drug had already allowed them to slaughter countless ogres, and that crushing anyone who used to look down on them provided an unrivaled thrill. Looking upon the trembling defenders, Tanru smirked malevolently, mockingly asking if the sight of his unstoppable legion wasn't the most frightening thing they had ever laid eyes on. Unfazed by the sinister display, the young teacher simply smiled with cool confidence, dismissing the villains' boasting with a calm and decisive refusal. Raising his hand with absolute composure, he ordered the heavy infantry forward, calling his heavily armored, beast-like vanguard to advance and meet the brute force head-on. He watched calmly as the drug-enhanced thralls scoffed at his heavily armored vanguard, confident that strange helmets could never overcome their newly granted power. Unfazed by their mockery, his lips curled into a subtle smirk as he declared they would be utilizing a long-dormant technique, leaving everyone wondering what secret power was about to be unleashed. The monstrous adversaries loomed ahead, their muscular frames bulging with a physical power that easily matched that of elite ogres. Unfazed by their overwhelming presence, the young strategist casually produced a syringe filled with a familiar fluid, declaring that he too possessed the very same instant rage enhancement drug, the Hop-Upper. Hearing this, the mad scientist burst into mocking laughter, dismissing the claim as a bluff and insisting that the substance was a unique creation only he could synthesize. Ignoring the scoffing, he promptly administered the formula, causing the villain's smug expression to instantly falter as a sudden surge of energy echoed through the air. Surrounded by towering, intensely empowered allies whose dark aura flared around them. The young strategist turned to his foe and calmly asked if he still believed the drug was a fake. The transformed warriors stood imposing and ready for battle, their monstrous countenances radiating raw, unchecked energy. Behind the villain, his own subalterns murmured in shock and confusion, questioning how anyone else could possibly replicate a formula that was supposed to be exclusive to their master. Unable to comprehend the impossible display before him, he screamed in pure fury, demanding to know how his rival had managed to duplicate his prized creation. Desperate to reclaim dominance, he barked a furious command to his monstrous ogres, ordering them to tear into the opposing line. Trying to deny what his own eyes were telling him, he reasoned that the opposing forces had merely mimicked the visual signs of his formula without achieving its true strength. Standing behind his hulking, mutated subjects, he screamed a challenge across the field, determined to prove that his original concoction remained superior. Responding to his call, a towering furred beast lunged forward with a guttural roar, leading the violent charge. With bone-crushing force, the monster brought down its heavy mallet in a ferocious overhead strike against the front line. Yet the enhanced warrior facing it grinned maniacally, unfazed as he braced himself against the massive blow. He swung back with tremendous speed and power, turning the momentum on his giant attacker. The force of the counter-strike knocked the monster back, leaving the observing knights stunned to see the newly empowered men matching the beasts in raw strength. Pressing his advantage, the empowered combatant taunted the beast, confident that their newly gained vigor surpassed the creature's raw might. Across the entire engagement line, a chaotic clash broke out as the reinforced soldiers forcefully drove back Tanru's army. Refusing to accept reality, Tanru shrieked that no one else could possibly replicate his elixir, desperately ordering his beasts to finish off the opposition. Emboldened by their newfound strength, one of the empowered men charged forward with a war cry, swinging a massive hammer directly at the giant ogres. But mid-strike, a sickening crunch echoed across the battlefield, halting the assault instantly and stunning the mad scientist. He collapsed to his knees right before the towering monster, his arms giving out completely as intense agony washed over him. Screaming in excruciating pain, the fighter clutched his trembling arms as his body buckled under immense pressure. Beside him, another warrior collapsed into a writhing heap, leaving the beastly monsters standing bewildered above their fallen foes. Panicking at the sudden turn of events, Tanru screamed orders at his collapsing men, demanding that they get back up and fight. Observing the pathetic display from behind, Garaku noted how agonizing the sight was, while the scientists turned in sheer shock. Despite their magically augmented muscles, the crude drug's severe side effects had drastically weakened their bones, causing them to fracture under the sheer strain. Having pushed past their absolute limits, their physical condition rapidly deteriorated, bringing their attack to a total collapse. He stared in wide-eyed shock, unable to comprehend the sudden collapse of his forces, as the young instructor calmly stated that his men were completely incapacitated. Distraught by their sudden breakdown, the rogue alchemist's men lay writhing on the ground, desperately shouting in confusion at how their opponents remained standing without a scratch. Ignoring their desperate cries, the young instructor walked calmly among his own heavily armored allies, casually granting them permission to shed their massive suits. As the heavy metal catches unlatched with a loud clank, the rogue alchemist watched in horrified disbelief, his eye widening as he realized his assumptions had been completely wrong. Emerging from the cumbersome suits, the warrior women stretched with audible relief, complaining about how cramped, stiflingly hot, and foul-smelling the interior became whenever the organic muscle layers expanded. Inside the discarded armor shells, the thick mass of cultivated muscle swelled against the outer plating, venting steam and a foul odor as it strained against its limits. Driven to near madness by the revelation, the panicked alchemist screamed in desperation, demanding to know what trick had been played upon him. Meanwhile, the instructor casually reviewed the equipment's flaws with his subordinate, who dutifully acknowledged that temporary discomfort was a small price for victory. The secret lay in the tactical application. Unlike his opponent's fatal flaw, the enhancement drug had never been injected directly into living human flesh, but rather into the synthetic muscle layers integrated into the armor. Because the heavy suits relied on biosynthetic musculature for movement, applying the enhancer amplified the suit's raw physical force without placing a single ounce of strain on the wearer's actual bodies. Consequently, when the drug's inevitable structural breakdown occurred, it merely tore apart the disposable artificial muscles inside the armor, leaving the soldiers inside completely unharmed. With the synthetic muscle armor absorbing the brunt of the hop-upper, the female soldiers collapsed in total exhaustion, unharmed but completely drained. Seeing the battle settled, Garaku ordered his forces to secure the remaining enemies and tend to the freed captives. Promptly obeying, the infantry moved in to disarm and bind the defeated hostile troops. Meanwhile, Testoria escorted the traumatized women to safety, offering comfort as the nightmare came to an end. Across the courtyard, the remnants of Tanru's force lay helpless as the magical enhancement faded completely. Turning his attention to Tanru, Garaku grabbed the trembling mage to conduct one final experiment based on his weight. Displaying 5 bottles of concentrated elixir, Garaku confronted Tanru, who shrieked in horror at what was clearly a lethal dosage. With a cold smile, Garaku dismissed his enemy's terror, intent on verifying his theory firsthand. Ignoring his desperate struggles, Garaku forced the bottles directly down the terrified mage's throat. Choking violently on the overwhelming concoction, Tanru panicked as he felt the fatal potion flood his body. He gasped and sputtered in utter confusion, unable to comprehend why he was collapsing, while his captor calmly questioned why he had fainted. Revealing that the liquid poured down his throat was nothing more than plain water, the young strategist noted how easily preconceptions manipulate the mind. Just as the elf commander arrived with her subordinate to report, she proudly announced that all enslaved captives had been rescued and every lingering criminal apprehended and bound. Despite their clean victory on the battlefield, he remained solemn, observing that the situation was not yet fully settled. To resolve the remaining matter, attention turned to the grand residence of Baron Borealis, standing quiet and undisturbed. Stepping into the estate, he was greeted respectfully by the elderly retainer, who guided him directly to the young lord's private quarters. Inside, the bedridden young baron stood on his feet in amazement, marveling at how light and completely revitalized his body suddenly felt. Looking at the boy, he disclosed the unexpected truth. The illicit magic drugs manufactured by Tanru had actually been administered to him as cure. He went on to clarify that when formulated correctly, those compounds were legitimate medicines created to heal severe afflictions like the Baron's. When the old butler wondered why the mage hadn't simply distributed them legally from the start, the young strategist inferred that Tanru had sought the prestige of knighthood above all else, desperate for social recognition. He calmly explained the truth of the situation, noting that calling a basic painkiller a miraculous cure was a perfect example of exaggeration, as the culprit merely wanted to appear far more impressive than he actually was. Continuing his assessment, he pointed out that properly examining patients or understanding which specific medicine to administer had been entirely beyond the man's capabilities, who had merely stumbled upon the manufacturing formula along the way. Because of this complete lack of genuine medical knowledge, the tragic reality was that the rogue mage had operated without any real understanding of the life or death consequences of his actions. Returning to the legal realities of the situation, the young strategist reminded the bedridden nobleman and his attendant that producing, using, or administering these unauthorized substances without official permission constituted a severe crime. Having laid out the gravity of the law, he placed a single finger to his lips, offering a knowing smirk while gently asking them to keep the entire secret strictly between themselves. Touched by his gesture, the young baron gratefully swore his complete silence regarding his miraculous cure, while his loyal attendant fervently promised to carry the secret with him to his grave. Satisfied with their pledges, he gave a polite nod of farewell, wishing the young lord well for the future as he prepared to quietly take his leave. However, before he could step out, a companion leaned in to whisper urgent news just as a frantic messenger burst through the doorway, announcing a sudden crisis. To everyone's astonishment, Knight Commander Testoria herself stepped into the room flanked by her subordinates, signaling that no sooner had one crisis been resolved than another pressing affair arrived on their door.